Chapter 10. Delving Those Dungeons. God's friggin' damn it. Standing shell-shocked and slack-jawed in a corridor underground God's nowhere, I had no clue why on earth I'd chosen to trust that drunken little piece of garbage. What a mess. Now, whatever happened, I'd respond back in this corridor with no way out. And I hadn't even had any chance to buy some decent arms and equipment that might do something to mitigate the impact my horrible stats had on my fighting efficiency. I spat for luck, hoping that somehow I'd be able to make it out without having to engage in combat, and that whatever Grek left me was at least marginally useful. I quickly picked up the 2 scrolls and started skimming through the contents. Heart rate increasing, my frown momentarily changed into a satisfied smile, and I rapidly read through both scrolls and enjoyed the 3 pop-ups that appeared seconds later. Congratulations! You have learned a new spell. Sonic Missile. You release a missile born from sonic waves that travels in a straight path at what you are aiming for. Every skill point in Sonic Missile will increase the potential chance of deafening the enemy. Properties: 1 to 10 sonic damage. 3% chance to deafen target. Range: 30 meters. Cast time: 1 second. Cooldown: 4 seconds. Mana cost: 10. Congratulations! You have learned a new spell class. Sonic Spells. Focusing mostly on producing sound and waves of sonic energy, sonic spells tend to focus on damage or impairing or affecting the targets. Every skill point in sonic spells will increase the damage or efficiency of sonic spells. Stat: Charisma. Congratulations, you have learned a new spell. Sonic Wave. You release a wave of sonic energy that starts at your hands and travels in an ever-widening cone in the direction you choose. Every skill point in Sonic Wave will increase the potential chance of deafening the enemy. Properties: 1 to 10 sonic damage, 3% chance to deafen target, range 15 meters, effect width 90 degrees, cast time 1 second, cooldown 6 seconds, mana cost 10. Finally, I had received something that would actually enable me to cause some real damage. Since both spells were based on charisma, the damage increased proportionally, and they would already be able to cause decent damage for a level 1 spell. Now, if I could only get out of here and find somewhere to level the spells, I might even be able to get spells that I could kill weak mobs with before they were able to reach me and take advantage of my horrible endurance stat. I realized that I hadn't taken a single look at my character sheet after creating my character. It looked like this. Character info: name Arcangelo, race half-elf, class Bard, level 1, experience towards next level 900 out of 1000. Crafting class: none. Gathering class: chronicler, novice. Stats and attributes: health 60 out of 60, mana 80 out of 80, plus 100. Stamina 60 out of 60, strength 8, perception 15, endurance 6, charisma 25 plus 5, intelligence 8, agility 8, luck 13. Skills: Barter, Gambling, High Tide. Lore: Local Lore, Dawnlight Forest, Musician, Performing. Sonic Spells: Sonic Missile, Sonic Wave. Traits and Achievements: Fair Visage, being blessed with the best from both parents, half-elves gain +1 charisma for each level gained. Low light vision, pariah to elves. Universally welcome. Reputation: Grants Crossing. General: current reputation, -325. Rank, neutral. Key persons: Atoria Durnfuddle. Current reputation, -3,400. Rank, despised. Gillum Drizzlefog. Current reputation, 550. Rank, neutral. I did find the character sheet to be entirely too wall of textish, and decided to remove the traits and reputation chart from the overview to make it less cluttered from here on. The content, however, I found to be not too shabby for a level 1 character. Now I could only hope that I would be able to make it out of here and see what my stats could evolve into at a higher level, and with this positive thought in mind, I decided to get a move on and see what I was up against. I decided against trying to sneak. mostly because my agility was low enough that I shouldn't even bother. I did give myself a mental reminder to take it slow and investigate everything as much as possible. For all I knew, the place was packed with spike traps, or whatever that sottish lizard had come up with. On a more positive vibe, I might find some hidden treasures, hints, or maybe even something useful for my chronicler profession if I paid attention. That being said, the first 10 minutes went by without any incident whatsoever. The tunnel was definitely old and in obvious disrepair, but seemed to be safe from further collapse for the time being. Also, enough dust had gathered that I could tell that it had been a good long while since the last time someone had passed this way. Some time passed by, and I was starting to get bored when I discovered the first trap. With my face. The click from when I stepped on the pressure plate should have been warning enough, but I actually froze in place, waiting patiently for the spiked board to drop down from the ceiling right into my shoulder, chest, and cheek. I stumbled back, cursing from the pain and shock, and the prompt told me that you have been hit. You receive 52 damage. Type piercing. Son of a bitch, that hurt. Goddamn sadistic twists. Give me a break already. I stumbled around for a bit, clutching my face and moaning. When I'd recovered a bit, unfortunately, I had to admit to myself how much of a rookie mistake this had been. Relaxing after just a couple of minutes. I was lucky that it hadn't hit spot on, or it might have one-shot me. It was bad enough as it was, really. Any damage right now would kill me on the spot. After this incident, I was extremely careful. Just a minute later, my diligence paid off, and I was able to discern a nasty bear trap hidden in a mound of dirt whose rusty iron jaws would definitely have killed me and would probably have removed the better part of my lower leg in the process. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Spot. This skill helps you to better spot what is hidden from plain sight, be it compartments, items, or traps. Every skill point in Spot will increase your chance of spotting what lies hidden to the naked eye. Stat: Perception. Great. Now, if I could only level this skill a bit, it might save me quite a bit of horrible pain in the future. Sure, pain in World of Chains was nothing near as debilitating as in real life, but a spike to the cheek was nevertheless quite an unpleasant feeling even if the pain was toned down. It probably compared to having a tattoo made, but then again, what did I know? It wasn't like I knew much about pain in the real world. I decided not to try to dismantle the trap. With my agility, I'd probably just set it off inadvertently and continued carefully along the tunnel. At this point, I sent a kind thought to Exogenics. They rarely diverted from their policy of high realism within the game, but thankfully they had made an exception with this beginner's level quest. Usually, in underground areas, you would need to bring some light source of your own, which would usually only last for a limited time and allow you to be spotted from miles away by any monster with a hunger for your blood. Down here, however, the walls had small, slightly luminescent crystals embedded within them every 30 feet or so. The light was still very dim, but with my half-elven eyes, I was able to navigate quite easily. I shuddered at the thought of having to stumble blind through a trap-filled corridor and patted my own back, congratulating myself for my choice of race. Over the next 10 minutes, I'd successfully navigated 3 other traps and my spot skill had risen to level 2, when finally I arrived at a large room that promised a change of pace. I could see the entrance to the room from afar and could clearly see that the room beyond was well lit. The entrance was framed by 2 columns with carved vines and grapes, and above the lintel I could see some text carved above the entrance. Great. This was most likely a hint of how to beat the test and survive. World of Chains often rewarded the diligent and those who paid attention. I crept closer, making sure that no one could see me from the room beyond, and peeked up at the writing. Rest in peace, the Gothic letters stated. Oh wow, thank you ever so kindly. I really needed that confidence boost. Reaching the entrance, I peeked inside and saw a smallish room made in the same crumbling bricks as the tunnel. Sparsely decorated, the room only held a table, a chair, and an occupant. Lounging lazily, feet thrown up on the table, was my own personal tormentor, Grek. I walked confidently into the room, ready to tell him quite a few unpleasant truths about his ancestry, except halfway into the room, I realized that it wasn't Grek. His clothes, while dirty, were more reminiscent of armor than the burlap sack that Grek wore. Also, his scales were bluish in color. And what really tipped me off? Unlike Grek, he carried a spear. The spear, while it looked to be in a state of disrepair and of bad quality, quickly started to occupy quite a bit of my attention as it slowly started pointing in my direction. The lizard's name tag said Kobold Guard and was yellow, indicating that he was the same level as me. I instantly stopped and tried to reason with the fellow. After all, Grek didn't seem that bad of a sort, now did he? Stiffly, I tried to affix a smile on my face and introduced myself. "Good day. My name is Arcangelo. I seem to find myself quite lost down here. Maybe you can help me find the exit?" Walking swiftly towards me, he bared his teeth in a smile. Really excellent teeth, those, and nodded his head in response. Coming even closer, he smirked, pointing back where I came from. Confused, I turned my head just a touch and screamed as his spearhead slid in between my ribs, killing me instantly. "You have been hit. You receive 38 damage. Type piercing." My vision slowly faded to black, and the pain guided me down to the floor where I collapsed, all thoughts fleeing from my scrambled mind. Slowly, my view floated above my dead body, and the world turned gray. I could only watch as the kobold stood over my dead body, grinning widely and spinning his spear around his head. "You have died. You can either wait for resurrection or respawn at your respawn point. Warning: respawning can result in negative effects to your items and stats, or loss of items. Wait or respawn." No other possibilities here. I chose respawn. An instant later, I came to in the middle of the tunnel right where the portal had deposited me, and instantly thumbed through my inventory and character sheet, trying to assess how bad the damage was. Dying in World of Chains was already bad news, but the damage differed. You always received a hit to the durability of the items you had equipped. Check, between 1 and 3 durability damage to all items. 4 or 5 additional deaths, and I'd be running around half naked. Also, a death would cost you a random experience and skill loss to the point where you could actually lose a level or skill level. Luckily, I'd been spared from that this time around, and I couldn't care less whether it was because I was still level 1 or because it was a class quest. The real kicker, though, was that you always risked leaving one of your items back with your corpse. This meant that sometimes you could see goblins run around in plate armor, wolves chewing bracelet-endowed arm bones, and God's fucking damn it, a kobold running around with all my money. With my rogue, I'd adopted the healthy habit of leaving everything at home that wasn't absolutely necessary for a given outing, including money. Odds were that I'd be able to remember it in the future if I survived this little field trip. Oh, and just to remind me how nice my little chat with the kobold had gone over, the system had rewarded me with a little pop-up. "Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Diplomacy. Not all situations need to be resolved with violence. Sometimes situations can be altered by talking it out. Every skill point in diplomacy will increase the chance of affecting the conversation in the direction that you desire. Stat: Charisma." I couldn't help but think that some exogenics nerd was looking at me on the screen, snickering to himself. At this point, however, diplomacy was off the table for the kobold. That little critter was going down. I decided to test out the new spell I'd received before using it to end the kobold's pitiful life. I turned towards the collapsed end of the tunnel, hefted the violin, focused on a particular pile of rubble, and activated Sonic Missile. I felt, rather than heard, the spell escaping from the violin and could see the air distorting in front of me. creating a tightly focused wave effect which exploded from the violin and moved at an impressive speed directly to the pile of rubble I had targeted. It exploded with a satisfying thwack. The effect on the pile of rubble was barely noticeable, but perusing my combat log for a second, my lips curled upward in satisfaction with the result. You have cast Sonic Missile. Damage done to pile of stones, 26. At least my huge charisma score was good for something. My spell damage was way beyond the 1 to 10 basis damage of the spell. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for my weapon damage. If anything, my measly strength and agility scores would deduct a bit from the standard damage of my dagger and shortbow. I decided that there was no reason even to equip my weapons. At least the charisma bonus from equipping the violin would increase my spell damage. I also cast Sonic Wave, trying to figure out how it worked. The visual effect was not entirely dissimilar, except the spell traveled a bit slower and caused a very wide wave effect to appear and grow wider along its length, as opposed to the tightly focused wave from Sonic Missile. Additionally, instead of only causing damage to the target, it damaged everything in its path. Clearly, Sonic Wave could be very effective in tiny tunnels such as this one, but would probably not be as effective in open environments where my enemies had ample opportunities to dodge the effect. I hurried down the tunnel, taking only the time necessary to disable pop-ups concerning damage. I really had no problem telling when I'd been hit. I avoided the traps and spent a short moment in front of the room entrance, mentally preparing myself and lifting 2 middle fingers to the taunting "Rest in Peace" sign before I entered to face my tiny reptilian adversary again. This time, the kobold guard was prepared, facing me with his spear ready and rushing to meet me the moment he spotted me. Nonetheless, I was faster, and after a short cast time, I released my Sonic Wave straight at him. The wave traveled along the corridor and met him square on. I could see his health bar going down by about 30%. He wavered on his feet, but continued on, increasing his pace. I yelled once again, releasing a Sonic Missile straight into his chest. Now his health was down to about 45%, and I could see his ears bleeding. Looked like he had been deafened. Disregarding his injuries, he was still running furiously, trying to close with me, and I scrambled backward, trying to gain some distance until my spells had cooled down. That didn't sit right with our furious lizard, who emitted a loud cry and jumped straight at me, spear in one hand in front of himself, extending his reach. Even though I'd made as much haste as humanly possible, his spear still hit the meat of my lower leg, removing over a third of my health in one strike. I cried out in pain and grabbed at the wall to keep on my feet. Luckily, at this point, my spell had cooled down, and I released a Sonic Missile straight into his ugly face, leaving him with just about 10% health. In retaliation, his tail slithered around my ankle, keeping me from moving away, while he struck again with the spear, piercing my other leg, promptly carving off another healthy slice of my health. He let the spear stay in the leg and started pummeling me with his closed fists, dealing rapid, non-lethal damage. Panicking, I finally saw the cooldown for Sonic Wave reach 0 and tried to cast it right in the kobold's ugly face, expecting to see his well-deserved death. Instead, my spell fizzled and died in my hands as I was unable to keep my concentration under the furious pummeling I was taking from the lizard's tiny fists. Feverishly, I tried a recast, but the guard's fists continued to disrupt my spell, and seconds later, my vision turned gray, and once again, I could look down upon my dormant body and the kobold taking out his frustrations on me. You have fallen unconscious. The kobold guard's fists were slowing down, and I just had the tiniest glimmer of hope that I might still survive when he lowered his face to my neck and bit into it. The now familiar pop-up appeared. You have died. You can either wait for resurrection or respawn at your respawn point. Warning. Respawning can result in negative effects to your items and stats or loss of items. Wait or respawn. Respawn. Jeez. Congratulations! You have learned a new skill. Concentration. Concentration helps you ignore distractions and even pain at will in order to complete what you are working on, Every skill point in concentration will increase the likelihood that you are not interrupted. Stat, endurance. Gah, yeah, fat lot of good that did me. Furious with the difficulty of it all and my myriad of bad decisions, I was entirely unsure what to do now. And, to add insult to injury, I could see that my shoes had stayed with my corpse. A short while later, I parked my sorry ass right outside of the chamber of the Kobold Guard and tried to come up with a better strategy. Of course, I could try again and again. If I hit a critical hit with one of my spells, I was pretty sure I could take him down. Unfortunately, dying a couple of times more would leave me entirely naked, and possibly without my violin as well. And I didn't think much of my chances without the damage boost I received from the instrument. For sure, I had received an increase to my unarmored dodge skill, but it would have to increase just a tiny bit faster to be any help. Also, this was the very first mob. What were the odds that a class quest involved only one single enemy? Something just felt wrong about the entire quest. Sure, exogenics didn't coddle you, but I'd never heard about a class quest where you were left without any chance of success or any guidance whatsoever. I glanced up at the sign again, cursing exogenics once again. Rest in peace, my ass. More like rest in pieces in my... Wait a moment. What was it that Greg had said before leaving me stranded?
Try not to bore him to sleep.
Or something like that? Could it really be this simple? Well, it wasn't as if I had much to lose at this point. I slowly stood up, cocked the violin and bow, entered the guard's room, and started playing. It was a simple tune, but one I could play dead drunk and blindfolded. A tune that had followed me since my parents had played it for me during childhood. The Vegan Lead, Cradle Song by Brahms. Involuntarily, even while playing, my body tensed in anticipation of the guard's attack. But miraculously, nothing happened. He just stared straight through me, clearly without seeing anything and with his entire being focused on my playing. I had started playing lightly but quickly built up the intensity, insistently lowering the guard's defense, and inside of my mind the entire time, I was singing the mantra of parents everywhere. Go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep already, you little bastard. When he slowly lowered his body to the ground and closed his eyes, I was so high-strung with emotion that I could cry when I received this pop-up. Congratulations, you have learned a new spell. Sleep. The single humanoid target goes into a magical slumber. Slapping or dealing damage to the target awakens the target. Noise does not. Properties: range 20 meters, cast time 3 seconds, effect duration 10 minutes, cooldown 15 minutes, mana cost 20, save versus sonic spells negates, stat, charisma. I flopped down onto the floor as if my strings had been cut. Finally, some good news. Maybe I had a tiny chance of making it out of here. After spending a short but tense moment relieving the kobold guard of his spear, my money, my shoes, and a couple of silver pieces he had on him, I decided to quickly proceed onwards. I decided against killing him in his sleep. Part of my morals acted like an angel on my shoulder, telling me it wasn't honorable to kill an indefensible enemy, but I still remembered the guard sinking his teeth into my neck. That part wouldn't affect me at all. Mostly, I decided not to try because I wasn't entirely sure I could finish him off without any damage to myself. As before, I didn't hurry but took whatever time was necessary to ensure that I didn't stumble into some life-threatening trap. This turned out to be a clever decision, as the single tunnel leading to the next room and next challenge concealed one clever collapsing trap and an area with several tiny spike traps in the floor, ready to pierce feet and shoes alike. Whoever had designed this quest definitely didn't go easy on the participants. I was just happy that I'd invested so many points into perception. Spot has increased to level 3, 57% progress to next level. The moment I laid eyes upon the doorway leading to the next chamber, I decided to once again put my non-existent sneaking skills to use and act the ninja. I didn't harbor any hope that my sneaking skills were up to spec, but at the least I wanted to see what was written on the lintel before I had to try my luck with whichever mobs might be waiting for me in the next room. Inching along the wall, I managed to see the words clearly carved into the lintel. Mine enemy. It was easy to chalk it up to a warning along the line of, "Here be enemies," but given that the text in the previous chamber hinted to how to solve the puzzle and gain a new skill, there had to be more to it. What if they were talking about the proverb, "The enemy of mine enemy is my friend"? In order to have that proverb make sense, however, I'd have to make friends with... Oh. I tried to remain my usual semi-pessimistic self, but could feel a wide smile spreading on my face, inexorable like the rising sun. If I was right about this, the days of my complete and utter uselessness might just be numbered. Caught up in the mood, I took a chance, peeked quickly around the corner, and by a stroke of luck, managed to get a good view of the room and the two mobs inside without them seeing me. One, the larger of the two, a kobold guard, was apparently arguing good-naturedly with the other, a light-framed kobold archer. Both were seated at a small, dilapidated wooden table in what appeared to be a small storeroom. Leaning back against the wall, I spent a brief moment considering my tactics, and then swung back out into the corridor, putting my bow against the strings. Truthfully, I don't know the correct name of the song, even though I've heard it dozens of times in different variations, but the title that's stuck with me is Welcome to My Fireplace. It supposedly originates from Romanian gypsies, and it's always had the same effect on me, like someone inviting you in from the cold, making you feel accepted and welcome. The warm, quick tones flew from my fiddle, and the effect on the kobolds was incredible. The archer, who sat at the table facing in my direction, was still seated and looking at me slack-jawed, eyes glazing over. The guard was slowly rising from his seat, looking back and forth between his companion and myself as in confusion of what was happening. His confusion slowly turned to anger. He said something to the archer, a gabble of harsh and guttural sounds completely incomprehensible to me, except for the single word bard in common. And when he didn't respond, he threw back his chair with the clear intent of going for my throat. Within the next second, two blessed things happened in quick succession. I received a pop-up. Congratulations, you have learned a new spell. Charm Person. The single humanoid target is ensorcelled into believing that the caster is a friend and ally. The target will act to defend the caster and will follow any orders that are not suicidal. The caster, or any of his party dealing damage to the target, dispels the enchantment. Properties: range 20 meters, cast time 3 seconds, effect duration 6 minutes, cooldown 10 minutes, mana cost 20, save versus sonic spells negates. Stat: charisma. I'd only managed to read the first sentence when the archer's eyes returned to normal, and he grabbed the closest thing to hand in order to stop the guard from attacking me, which happened to be his bow. Still seated on his chair, he nevertheless managed to bring the bow round in a fluid motion, hook the guard's head in between the string and the limb of the bow, and hang on. Caught entirely by surprise, the guard flopped back, landed on his back on the low table, and after a split second of utter confusion and fury, drove his spear into the sitting archer. Quickly, the situation devolved into a frenzied back and forth of flurried attacks between the two, the archer getting the worst of it, as he only had his claws and a single arrow he used to stab the guard. As I saw the health of the archer quickly deteriorating, I snapped out of my passivity and cast a sonic missile on the guard and moved rapidly back into the tunnel to create some space between us and allow the spell to cool down. Moving out of eyesight, I waited for a couple of seconds, hearing only the grunting of the struggle and a final scream, which was followed by the sight of the blood-covered guard stumbling into the corridor, about half of his health remaining and with his slitted eyes screaming bloody murder. To his detriment, the timing was just right for me. First, I released a sonic wave which covered the entire tunnel at this distance, leaving him with no chance of dodging or avoiding the spell. When he stumbled onward, battered and bloodied, I met him with another sonic missile straight to the chest at a distance of a couple of meters. His bruised corpse hit the ground just a meter away, and I released a primal triumphant sound somewhere between a roar and a yell. You have defeated a weak kobold guard in battle. You gain 30 experience points. A minute or so later, my pulse finally calmed down a bit, and I was left feeling rather impressed by how well they were able to simulate the flush of adrenaline and the effect it has on you. Hands tingling in the aftermath, I got on with the looting, and enjoyed watching how both sonic spells and my 2 damage spells had increased to level 2. The kobold guard was a bit of a letdown, really. He did have a small spear, which I decided to equip in order to replace my marginally inferior dagger. Stone-tipped small spear. An inelegantly constructed small spear with a rough wooden shaft and a flint spearhead attached with sinew. Damage, 1 to 8. Workmanship, inferior. Durability, 18 out of 25. I wasn't counting on it to save my life if I ran out of mana, but you never know. Apart from that, he only held 6 copper coins and a crappy, near-destroyed leather chestplate that was several sizes too tiny for me. The kobold archer, on the other hand, had a pleasant surprise in store for me. Even though his bow had been destroyed in the fight and he wore no armor, he held a quiver with 25 arrows. Small fur arrow. This fur arrow is tipped with a bronze arrowhead and fletched with an unknown animal's feathers glued to the shaft. The arrow is of a decent making, but too small to use with medium-sized bows. Damage, 1 to 8. Workmanship, average. He also held a small, greenish and unhealthy-looking unidentified potion in a belt on his waist. I took it all and saved it for later. With my low intelligence score, there was no way that I'd be able to identify the potion without skills or help. And chugging a potion in order to figure out what it does has always been a recipe for explosive bowel syndrome. In this game, sometimes involving a true explosion. I lingered over the room a bit, looking through the battered crates and wooden barrels that were placed around the storeroom, and managed to rummage my way through a lot of rotten foodstuffs before locating 3 bolts of linen. Waste not, want not. I could always sell the stuff, if I managed to make it out of here. Items in World of Chains were typically to be put in 2 categories, natural items and crafted items. Natural items can be anything unprocessed from a piece of iron ore to a dragon's tongue. They are divided by rarity, from common, mostly vendor trash with some usability, then uncommon, highly used for crafting, and rare, very effective for crafting, to very rare, extremely powerful for crafting. I'd been told that higher rarities exist, but had yet to see any. The scale still worked, though. The higher the rarity, the better it would work for crafting. Crafted items were a different story, with their quality determined by 3 things: the material you used for them, the workmanship of the craftsman who made it, and whatever magic was added to the item. The workmanship part of it I knew a little about. It went from bad workmanship, low, inferior, average, and on to high. And whatever came next, and affected the durability and defense or damage stats of the item. Concerning the materials, I was totally in the blank. I was sure that there was a natural progression of quality and subsequent improvement in stats and the like, depending on which type of wood you used for your spear, but hell if I knew how it worked. That was still on my to-do list, way down there after surviving this damn place. Oh, and magic. My ignorance was twice as complete on that subject. The intelligent reader will note that this explanation isn't exactly the most thorough or factual, but that can happen when you play a game without any help or journal function. Also, when I'd played the beta, I'd spent most of my time completely enthralled with the complexity of the combat and the impressiveness of the graphics, and never got around to crafting. I got back to business. The following tunnel returned to the by now well-known concept, brick upon brick of absolute monotony, trying to lull my attention to sleep and miss the traps they were sure to have hidden. It almost worked, too. This time, they had actually placed the traps on the floor right before the door to the next room. where one would almost inevitably start looking up in order to be able to read the message over the door. I once again thanked my better-than-average eyesight and spent the next minutes on my stomach, discovering that a good number of the bricks in the floor were actually just fake shelves covering small, extremely sharp spikes covered in a nasty substance. Spot has increased to level 4, 12% progress to next level. Feeling confident I knew where I could safely step, I delicately tiptoed close enough to the door to read the next message. The obvious choice. Obvious trap is obvious. They wanted people to think that there was only one obvious choice. If they followed the same procedure as before, they were hinting at something a bit deeper. And the only thing I could think of was the proverb, "The obvious choice is usually a quick regret." Of course, this meant nothing to me, when I didn't know what obvious choice they were hinting at. This time around, I could tell from the tunnel that the next room was decidedly larger than the two earlier, and no enemies were to be seen right away. I decided to get a look at what the room offered, inched my way closer to the door, and, hugging the door frame, peeked around the corner. The room beyond was large, circular, and dimly lit, but two light sources clearly illuminated the room and the mobs inside. In the very center of the room, I could clearly see the obvious choice, a shimmering portal entirely reminiscent of the one that brought me here, guarded by a single kobold guard. The not-so-obvious choice was maybe 50 meters away, on the far side of the portal, a low bonfire surrounded by a kobold shaman and 2 kobold guards. This filled me with a huge sense of relief. I felt pretty confident that I'd be able to put the single guard near the portal to sleep quickly enough that I'd be able to step through the portal, which hopefully led to the exit, before any of the other kobolds even became aware of my presence. At the very same time, it brought along a huge wave of frustration. After all this trouble, I wanted to not just survive. I wanted to excel and earn any bloody reward possible. I just didn't see how it was possible for me to tackle 4 mobs and live to tell the tale. I chanced another peek at the room and its inhabitants. Looked to me like the kobold guard near the portal kept circling the portal at an extremely slow and predictable pace, which allowed me to get a good look of the group near the fire without being spotted. One of the guards was tending to something over the fire, while the other guard was whittling away at something, and the shaman was apparently reading something by the light of the fire, next to a large wooden chest. Damn. I'd bet anything I owned that the key that Greg gave me fit into the lock of that chest. I sat down for a breather in the relative safety of the tunnel to contemplate my possibilities, which also allowed the very last of my mana to regenerate, but no matter how I looked at the math, I came up one short. I'd be able to put one of them to sleep, probably the portal guy, and charm one other. The charmed lizard would then, theoretically, be able to keep one fellow kobold occupied, which left me with one single kobold that I wouldn't be able to take in a one-on-one fight. Even though I hadn't faced a shaman before, I didn't hold any hopes that he'd be any easier to best than one of the guards. Caster mobs were typically a tad more difficult than melee mobs. They were usually both more resourceful, inventive, and intelligent. Time out. This last thought had breathed a bit of life into a couple of my synapses and left me with a harebrained scheme that just might work. Well, the worst that could happen at this point, probably, was that I'd die yet another time and aim straight for the portal instead. Some guy once said, "At the end of the day, we must go forward with hope. Something. I was pretty sure that it was an excellent quote, and I decided to follow the part of it that I remembered. I peeked around the corner and started timing the portal guard, waiting for the right moment. When I felt that I'd hit the right timing, I started casting sleep, and 3 seconds later, I could feel the energy leaving my body, rushing towards the guard as a barely visible gust of wind, and I pumped my fist into the air when I could see him fall prone on the exact far side of the portal of the other kobolds. With a little luck, they wouldn't be able to see his fall and wouldn't know what was going on. Unfortunately, I couldn't manipulate his fall, and the guard had dropped his spear with somewhat of a clatter. After a few seconds of frozen silence, I heard two voices exchanging words in the harsh kobold language, followed seconds later by one of the kobold guards approaching the portal slowly, short sword in hand. I immediately started walking towards him, casting Charm Person simultaneously. So far, my plan worked. A moment later, I could see how his name tag changed from a hostile red outline to a friendly green. Now, for the linchpin of my plan. I continued walking past the portal and the sleeping kobold guard and raised my voice to be heard clearly. "Good day to you, sirs. Mind if we speak for a bit?" The shaman jumped to his feet.
Rathkavash!
He growled. I sincerely hoped I wasn't wrong. It'd be a shame to get killed because the kobolds didn't speak common. Continuing onwards, I motioned for the charmed kobold guard to stand next to me and continued. Now, there's no need for violence. Your friend is snoring peacefully near the portal, and my good companion here has decided to back my side for a bit instead of yours. Is there anything wrong with us discussing a peaceful solution? I plastered a false wide smile on my face and prayed a silent prayer to whoever was listening that this worked.
Deneth!
He spat, looking around him and clearly doing a bit of mental arithmetic of me having dispatched his two friends, as well as somehow having made it past all the kobolds in the tunnel.
What do you want, human?
He glanced around the room as if unsure how to deal with me. A bard that didn't attack on sight was probably not a regular occurrence in here. I responded, "Just the answer to one quick question. Now, your people have probably been placed down here to test the prowess of all incoming bards. You'll of course have noticed that I've bypassed your friends down the tunnel, and that the odds aren't looking that good for you at the moment. The thing is, I'm getting tired of bloodshed. So how about this? I just walk over to that chest, unlock it, take the contents, and leave, and no one else needs to be hurt. Does that sound agreeable to you?" I activated my high tide skill and waited, trying my best to look entirely self-assured and semi-bored. The kobold shaman looked lost in thought for a moment, and then spoke, as if musing aloud to himself.
Kobolds get paid to keep bards from escaping. This bard is not escaping right now, yes? No clear. What is the word? Instructions.
I just barely kept myself from laughing out loud. This kobold seemed to be somewhat of a kindred spirit. Unclear guidance can be such a pain, especially if one is underpaid. Take your time, good sir. I'll just be wandering about for a bit. To ensure that he didn't try to jump me, I openly counted out 5 silver coins and left them on the floor before I walked straight to the chest and used the key that Greg had given me after checking for traps. I really didn't trust the cold-blooded cheater. To my delight, it unlocked, and I shoveled the entire contents into my bags without even looking at what it was, nodded politely to the shaman, and went for a walk, which just so happened to lead me right into the portal. My world contracted to a few yellow swirling lights, everything smelled of mint strangely, and I appeared back in the mayor's house, where Greg was snoring in a chair. Chapter 11. Revelations, Book 1. Usually, I tend to think of myself as a relatively even-tempered guy, and I'd be the first to admit that the past couple of days had tested me to the point where it seems like I kept cursing and exploding left and right and acting out of character. However, the fear of dying I'd experienced over the past couple hours, combined with the sight of this little prick snoring happily in an armchair, sent my multitude of pent-up emotions right into a boil. I walked over and tipped the chair over, letting Greg tumble to the ground in a heap behind the chair. The sight of him awakening mid-air with a sound approximating will stay with me for the remainder of my life, and even in my furious state, it brought a wicked, admittedly, smile to my face. I quickly followed him, knelt next to his sprawled body, and started lecturing him on his transgressions. You think you can just... Unfortunately, I'd only just started on my tirade when I felt something nudge my, nether regions, and Grek grumbled,
Back off.
I froze, looked from his face down to the serrated and extremely sharp-looking knife that was located right around my most precious parts, looked back to Grek's icy blue reptile eyes, which seemed quite inhumane at the moment, and slowly, ever so slowly, raised my hands and backed away. Somehow his glare, which for a moment had seemed incredibly cold and threatening, returned to his earlier unfocused, short-sighted stare, and getting to his feet, he put on a wide smile.
So, you made it. Let's see how you did.
Slurring a couple of words in the kobold language, darkness seemed to gather around Grek until a couple of seconds later, a small dark blue oval appeared on the table. Shadows and light played inside the small oval, morphing, flowing, gradually forming apparitions and coalescing into me, standing inside a tunnel, cursing at the space where moments earlier a portal had been. Gesturing with his hands, Grek manipulated the events following my doings from the past hours. As I was already more than aware of what I'd been going through, and not very interested in watching myself get killed, I slumped down into another chair and just relaxed for a while. A few short minutes later, I was shaken from my trance by 2 pop-ups. Congratulations! You have completed the quest, Bard Class Trial, Entering the World of Song. You have managed to not only survive the trial, but also exceed Grek's expectations in coming up with ingenious solutions and catching on to hints in your surroundings. Basic reward: you have received 500 experience points. Experience to next level: 400 out of 2,000. You have earned an achievement, Apprentice Bard. Skill gain on charisma-based skills is increased by 3%. Item received, Apprentice's Copper Pendant, +1 to all attributes. Additional reward for extraordinary performance and seeking peaceful solutions. You have received 300 experience points. Experience to next level, 700 out of 2,000. Item upgraded to Apprentice's Copper Pendant of Charisma, +1 to all attributes, +3 to Charisma. Your reputation with Grek Durzum has increased by 1,000. New reputation, 675. Neutral. Congratulations, you gained a level. You are now a level 2 Bard. +1 Charisma from racial bonus, you have 5 attribute points to assign. That sure as hell got my attention back to the real world. Well, the fake world, but you catch my drift. Back in the beta, quests were generally pretty straightforward, and the reward you'd receive was usually set from the starting point, and when it wasn't, you were generally told exactly what to do to obtain a bonus. This was entirely new to me. Bonuses to the rewards based on how true to the class you played? Some players would probably never discover this, and others would probably just continue with the usual hack and slash because that's what they were used to from every other game, and warriors might actually gain bonuses without changing their style at all. But for the people like me, who loved to immerse ourselves in the game and actually play the part we were given, this was an incredible incentive to play as true to the role as possible. After spending a bit of time immersed in my own thoughts, I came to at the sound of Grek clearing his throat noisily. When I looked at him, though, something had changed. His eyes were clear. He was sitting straight in the chair, and he was looking straight at me, steepling his claws.
I have reviewed your potential, kid, and have found you to be acceptable material,
he said. No blurring of his words, no shortening of his phrases, and no hint of his kobold accent. What the hell was going on?
Obviously, this means that you are due for some enlightenment. Now shut that mouth. You look like a local bumpkin. First things first, your reward for completing the initiation along with my congratulations. You are far from the fastest to complete, and your trap-clearing skills are abysmal. But you show a lot of promise for thinking on your feet and actually listening to what is said. A rarer gift than one should think.
He pushed the necklace over the table to me, and I stashed it quickly without any comments.
Now, you will already have surmised that I am not just the local drunk. Unfortunately, at this point, I cannot disclose either who I truly am or who I serve. I can tell you the following 2 facts. I serve someone who has the best interest of Grant's Crossing at heart, and it is necessary for me to remain to be seen as the local sot. I understand that you may have a lot of questions for me. Feel free to ask them.
A lot of questions? That was something of an understatement. The possibilities and implications were swirling around my muddled mind. I asked the first thing that came to mind. Why the charade? What's the point?
Straight to the point, I see. I can respect that. Basically, I am here because Grant's Crossing is not doing as well as it should. With the material arriving, the monsters and groupings that we know of, and the persons who live in the village, it should be flourishing. But, unfortunately, it seems to be stagnating instead of reaching the potential it ought to reach. At first, I was simply here to aid the village's growth as a simple bard. A much-needed vacation of sorts. Later, when I came to the conclusion that some unknown party or parties must be influencing the village, I was ordered to act the buffoon in order to gain more information.
He seemed to deflate a bit in his chair before continuing.
Obviously, I have not managed to gain any headway whatsoever.
I chewed on this for a moment. All right, then why involve me? It's not like I know anyone in town. His lopsided smile seemed a little sad to me.
Basically, Arcangelo, it is a calculated risk to me. You are new to the town, in a situation where you converse with a lot of people daily, and from what I have seen so far, you are not entirely inept with words. Maybe you can make some breakthrough where I could not, in which case I might be able to divulge more information to you. Also, and I say this as a fact, not a threat, if you were to try to expose me, no one would believe you.
I chuckled a bit under my breath at that. Drunk or not, he was still a bit of a bastard. I leaned forward in my seat and put on a huge smile. All right, Grek, or whatever your real name is, then I just have one question left. What's in it for me? You have been offered a quest. Layers and Layers, Part 1. Grek Durzum has asked you to discover who is responsible for holding back the progress in Grant's Crossing. Reward, 30 silver, 1,000 experience points, 1,000 reputation with Grek Durzum and the party backing him. Accept or decline? Accept. No questions asked. Not only was it a quest chain, which promised further rewards down the line, but Grek was most likely backed by a powerful group and maybe even a government agency of some sort. Gaining rep with those kinds of groups was notoriously hard because they didn't just sign up anybody. I shook hands with Grek and left him and the mayor, who let us both out without a single word, accompanied by a cold, hard glare, with my mind in a befuddled state. I definitely needed a chance to nurse a drink and look at my results. In my mind's eye, I was already going through my inventory, checking over my hard-earned goodies, but the moment I stepped foot in the Warlock's End again, my deserted bucket of brackish water and polishing cloth reminded me of my half-finished repeatable quest. Honestly, I didn't know whether these sorts of quests had any kind of expiry on them, but seeing as how World of Chains is all about realism, there probably was. Thus, I carried my tired body around the tavern, cleaning and polishing the remaining candle holders. Half an hour later, I was rewarded with the by now familiar pop-up. Congratulations! You have completed the quest. No idle hands in this place. Repeatable. Gillum Drizzlefog is satisfied with the effort you have delivered. Reward. You have received 150 experience points. Experience to next level, 850 out of 2,000. Your reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog has increased by 250. New reputation, 800. Neutral. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 125. New reputation, minus 200. Neutral. 30 seconds later found me with a mug of ice-cold gintish beer in my hand, a light, lemony bitter with a rejuvenating effect, feet on the table, and my attention completely focused on my inventory. All in all, the chest had contained 5 items and a whopping 12 silver and 4 copper. After congratulating myself for a moment, my smile turned into a frown. 2 days inside the game, and I'd already lost any sense of proportions. I had what amounted to millions of silver pieces in the bank. The value of the gold piece in World of Chains depends on the amount of money currently in the game and is decided solely by exegetics. Currently, a gold piece is, at this time, roughly the equivalent of 1.5 euros. Yet somehow my subconscious was still celebrating at receiving such a measly amount. Best keep the goal in mind. Anyway, the really interesting stuff, as usual, was the loot. First, there were 2 potions, unidentified, a clear glass bottle with a slightly fluorescent blue-green fluid inside, and a dark, murky liquid. I'd really have to look into increasing my lore skill in order to be able to identify these myself. What a pest to carry around some stuff which might actually be life-saving. If only I knew what they were for. Mentally, I added another thing to my to-do checklist for the following day. The 2 rings were also unidentified. What a bother. The last item was the true riddle, though. The item description was cryptic enough, basically just stating that it was an unidentified book in an unknown language, which helped me not at all. The look of the book itself did nothing to detract from my ignorance, as it was thin and battered with an unadorned dark brown cover and no illustrations on the inside. At least the letters were regular letters and not hieroglyphs or something. The language was probably Kobold. I'd have to ask Grek later. Seriously? 5 items and none of them identifiable? Sure, intelligence was one of my dump stats, but I'd truly forgotten how much there was to learn in the game and how difficult it was at times. Pfft, want some cheese with that wine, Daniel? I thought to myself. It was time to stop grumbling and check out the icing on the cake. As I'd leveled up earlier, I had attribute points to add. I took a look at my attribute points first. Strength, 8 plus 1. Perception, 15 plus 1. Endurance, 6 plus 1. Charisma, 26 plus 8. Intelligence, 8 plus 1. Agility, 8 plus 1. Luck, 13 plus 1. Wow, my charisma really was through the frigging roof for a level 2 character. With the bonuses from the pendant and the violin, it was actually more than twice what my second highest attribute was. Now, if I spent my points from this level on endurance, the next on agility, and the third on strength, I'd gain a bit more in close combat survivability. Only, there was no way this character would ever become truly proficient in close combat. To begin with, I'd been told that the bard was a middling to bad close combat character, and that was if you developed your build for it. I gave it a second thought. Really, why would I even want to focus the least bit on close combat? My spell damage was amazing, and so far not a single enemy had resisted even one spell. Maybe, if I continued more or less the same way I'd started, I'd eventually be able to bespell my enemies before they reached me and avoid close combat altogether. Now, this meant that I could skip strength and agility completely, and intelligence as well, for the moment, since I wasn't at a lack for mana as long as I had the violin's mana well ability. I'd put a couple points in endurance, since it'd be just a tad optimistic to think that I could avoid damage entirely. In the end, I opted for +2 endurance and +1 charisma, perception, and luck. I increased the attribute points on my character sheet, clicked accept, and leaned back in anticipation. I really, truly loved this part. Moments later, I could feel a current rushing through me, incorporating the changes. I could practically feel how my chest grew just a tad less skinny and my eyesight the slightest bit sharper. Moments later, the rushing feeling disappeared, and I felt hale, whole, and incredibly good. I exhaled deeply. Whew, boy, one could truly become addicted to that. After all the excitement, I'd actually planned to just get some dinner and call it a night. Sure, it was still early, but I was pretty exhausted mentally. In the middle of my dinner, however, I was interrupted by a couple of fingers prodding my leg. Looking up, I stared straight into the huge eyes of a beautiful elven girl, who looked to be about 10 years of age. When she asked me innocently with a quavering voice when I was going to play that evening, I just didn't have the heart to turn her down, and told her that I'd start as soon as I'd finished eating. That evening, I tried a different tack from the night before. I took charge of the audience straight from the start, but tried to involve them a lot more. Why? Well, 2 clever reasons. First, I wanted to learn a lot more about the locals, and second, I'm a lazy bastard when I can get away with it. If they could entertain themselves, I'd be more than happy to sit at the edge of the stage and applaud along with the rest of the audience. In the end, I actually had a great deal of fun. I learned a number of local songs and dances, organized an impromptu talent competition for the kids, and created a snappy little ditty over "The Farmer in the Dell" as a reward for the winner, a blushing 12-year-old dwarf kid with a shockingly beautiful singing voice. Eventually, when I told everybody that I was absolutely bushed and ready to turn in, they actually booed until I promised them a last song. As I wanted to leave them with something that wasn't too unapproachable, I ended up playing and singing Scarborough Fair to them, one of the most beautiful traditional ballads that I know. After packing up the violin and staggering to my chamber, I got the hint that everything had been well received as I reviewed the pop-ups I had received over the past couple of hours. Quite the lovely good night reading. Your reputation with Gillum Drizzlefog has increased by 250. New reputation, 1,050. Liked. Your reputation with Grant's Crossing has increased by 125. New reputation, minus 75. Neutral. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Teacher. You know how to impart your knowledge to those around you and help them increase their skill gains faster and more efficiently. Every skill point in Teacher will increase the rate at which your subject increases his skills. Limitation. At this skill level, you can only teach those whose skill is lower than yours, and you cannot teach somebody a new skill. Stat. Intelligence. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill. Singing. Anybody with a voice can sing, but few people ever care to learn how to sing properly. A person with a good singing voice who knows how to use it can keep everyone enchanted, from commoners to royalty. Every skill point in singing will improve the effect that your singing has on the audience. Stat. Charisma. In addition, my musician, performing, and local lore Dawnlight Forest skills all increased by 1. Before I surrendered to sleep, I again spent a couple of minutes just taking in the night view of the forest and playing to myself. The reddish hue of the night sky, along with the low gurgling sound of the jagged rush, which could be heard even in the middle of the village, lent the evening an idyllic atmosphere. Again, I let my mind relax from the tumultuous events of the day and just played for a bit, letting my fingers softly lull the forest to sleep, eventually, along with myself. Chapter 12. Off to Granny's. The day after, I awoke with a hint of a dream half remembered. Something involving otters with monocles and dapper dolphins. Fighting, possibly? Apart from that juicy tidbit, my subconscious refused to yield any further information. For a brief moment, I just lay in bed, enjoying the silence and lack of immediate plans for the day, and contemplated how that even worked. Did my real body sleep and the dreams I had out there were somehow transferred to the game? Alternatively, was the vague dream somehow implanted into my mind in game? Scratching my body, damn fleas, whatever else happened, I was going to get some new clothes and a bath today. I got up and went downstairs, chatting for a while with Jeb before ordering some breakfast. Over a gracious serving of eggs and bacon, I contemplated the plans for the day. First things first, my backup plan for gaining reputation with Grant's Crossing safely within the tavern's walls had apparently fizzled out overnight. When I'd asked Jeb for another repeatable quest, he'd said something very kind, polite, and heartwarming that effectively translated to, "Unfortunately, you can only use the repeatable quest to gain reputation until liked status, which you gained yesterday, remember?" The good part was that he'd mentioned that his DAW might have some other stuff he'd like my help with. I'd be sure to ask him later on. This left me with a couple of things that I wanted to do inside the city before looking further into my chronicler quest about the Warlock. The first of these was actually talking to Gillum, in order to see which new quests he was ready to throw at me. But apparently, he always slept in late because he was the one who closed the tavern for the night, usually around 2 a.m. The game clock told me that it was 8 a.m., which meant that he probably wouldn't wake up for a couple of hours at least. Never mind. I finished up my breakfast, dropped off the dirty plate in the kitchen, and got to it. As I walked out the door, I found myself in a great mood, whistling like the main character in some cheesy, ancient black-and-white movie. I felt physically great. Both my situation and my character were improving, and I was off to buy some decent beginner-grade items for myself. Suddenly, I recalled my lengthy chat with Grek concerning shadowy forces at play in Grant's Crossing, and my mood plummeted. Damn. My positive vibes didn't last long in this place. Today, I didn't waste my time wandering around town getting to know everybody, but went straight to the Traveler's Delight, the best and only merchant house in town. The second largest building in the area, it was by far the best maintained and the gaudiest. The building itself was nothing special. The tried and true 4 walls, sloped roof, and a porch. But the front was something else. The entire front wall of the house was covered in decorative woodwork, showing all sorts of stuff. Gears, weapons, foodstuffs, clothing. Basically any item you could imagine being able to buy in a small village like Grant's Crossing, and then some. I actually spent a short while trying to decipher whether there was any history behind this, like in the Warlock's End, but no. It was sheer advertising overload. Oh, I forgot to mention that all the carvings were colored too, in bright, jolly colors. Entering the front door, a bell announced my presence, and from somewhere deeper within the store, a voice announced,
"Be right with you."
I took the time to scan the store and was left with the feeling of being inside an attic, in which somebody had been storing everything that an eccentric collector had been stashing for the past 100 years. There was no apparent system. An old saddle was kept next to 2 matching short swords, a coffee pot, and 5 20-kilogram bags of fertilizer. The only things that distinguished the inside of the store from that of an old antique shop, you know the kind, where the owner never actually tries to sell anything but only has the shop in order to chat with guests, were the lack of dust and the size of the shop. The store sported 12 parallel sets of Florida roof shelves, going all the way to the back of the store, more than 15 meters back. The back of the shop was dominated by a pristine, wide wooden counter, which probably led back to the domestic part of the house. I could hear a set of footsteps getting closer, and moments later, Elizabeth Bertinga, the owner of the merchant house, appeared through a back door. What a sight she was! Picture the grandmother from Red Riding Hood, small and stout body, wrinkles, ever-present smile and all. Then add a couple of loafers, a well-worn brown dress which sported a few floral imprints and a charming nearsighted squint, and you had Mrs. Bertinga. Everything practically shouted kind grandmother to the heavens. Seriously, she even wore a knitted shawl, and her voice had that charming, quavering quality which just makes you want to ask whether she needed a hand with anything.
How can I help you today, young man?
She asked. Smiling, I introduced myself and then gestured at my clothes and told the cover story I'd been preparing. Basically, I was robbed and left with these itchy piles of burlap instead of my own clothes. I hope that I've been able to earn enough to finally buy something a bit more decent and burn these. Also, I'm probably going to be traveling the countryside a bit in the near future, which leaves me in need of some basic equipment. Oh, and finally, I hope you can help me with the identification of a couple of items. She nodded and started moving towards the shelves.
You just follow me, dear. We'll have you covered in no time at all. Don't you worry.
For the next 10 minutes, I followed her as she puttered around between the shelves and removed items for me to carry over to the counter. There was seemingly no system to the arrangement, but she never hesitated over where the different items were placed. The entire time, she kept up an incessant stream of grandmotherly advice and comments, and I could only follow her obediently, nodding and agreeing at appropriate times. In the end, I'd amassed a small pile of useful outdoor items, along with a set of sturdy yet good-looking clothes and a pair of low boots. Mrs. Bertinga was beaming as if she'd knitted the clothes by herself.
This should have you covered for starters, love. If you plan to have any extended travels or are in need of a little extra comfort, just say the word. I'm sure we can find something to your liking. This dashing outfit is just something for a handsome youngster like you. Oh, and you were asking about having some items identified?
I actually blushed at her words. 34 years old. Yet I still felt like I was 6 years old again, and Grandma was asking if any of the girls in my class were cute. I replied, yeah, I found a couple of what seemed to be magic rings and 3 potions on my travels, only I can't tell what they do. And the thing is, I'd actually like to learn how to identify these kinds of items myself, instead of having to bother you any time I find something that's just the tiniest bit special. Could you perhaps help me with that? She smiled widely and folded her hands in front of herself.
You were right to come to old Bertinga here. Sure, I could take a look and tell you what these items are for a tiny fee. But a clever and well-traveled young man like you ought to learn how to identify these kinds of items for himself. I'd love to take an hour or 2 to teach you the basics of this, for a small fee, of course. I can't promise you that we'll be able to cover all basic items in one go, but I'm sure we can improve your knowledge quite a bit.
Aha! Translated to game speak, that meant something like, pay 1 silver piece and I'll identify your item. Pay 5 silver pieces and I'll increase the relevant lore skill. Then you'll be more likely to identify them for yourself in the future. I didn't have to ponder the matter for a long time. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, then I'd like to learn from your wisdom on both potions and magic items. What will all these items amount to in total?
Oh, usually it would amount to 53 silver and change. But since I've taken a liking to you, I'm willing to let everything go for 45 silver pieces.
Damnation. That was way beyond the, let me see, 30 silver pieces and 32 copper pieces, 33 silver pieces total that I had at the moment. But what if... I piled up the arrows, weapons, armor, and bolts of cloth that I'd looted in the kobold dungeon, gave her my widest smile, and said, unfortunately, I don't have that much, Mrs. Bertinga, but I was able to locate these items in my travels. How about I trade you all of these and give you all the 30 silver that I own? I activated my high tide skill and gave her an earnest smile. For a short second, her eyes widened, and then she gave a short, full-throated laugh. She then looked me straight in the eye, smiled, and waited. And waited. I could only watch as the 30-second timer reduced to 0 and my buff disappeared. She looked at me intensely for a second, as if measuring me, and then she responded.
Unfortunately, my dear, I can't do that. Except for the bolts of linen and the arrows, everything is of rather poor quality, and the arrows are small enough that I'll have trouble finding someone who wants to purchase them. If I were to take the lot, I still couldn't possibly go below 35 silver pieces.
What a crafty old biddy. For a second there, she had revealed herself. There was no way in hell that she was the blundering old lady that she pretended to be. She had a razor wit and definitely the skills to match if she were somehow able to tell that I was using my skill on her. Either I'd have to skip some of the items or skills that I really wanted, or I'd have to somehow do a switcheroo on her. Now, if Granny were somehow just a bit like me, she'd be too clever for her own good and probably damn curious to boot. Which gave me an idea. I understand you entirely. Of course, I wouldn't want to entice you into a bad deal. That leaves me in a bit of a pickle, I'm afraid. I don't have the money to purchase everything I want, and the only things I own are the ones I'd be asking you to teach me how to identify. Oh. I inserted a theatrical pause at this point, as if considering deeply. Say, Mrs. Bertinga, you wouldn't happen to be interested in a game of chance, now, would you? The glint in her eye told me her answer way before her quavering voice replied.
Well, I have been known to participate in a wager once or twice when I was younger. What do you have in mind?
Yesterday, I was stuck in a horrible dungeon for most of the day, and the 5 items I want to have identified came from that dungeon. 3 items were potions. 1 I located in the belt of a monster I slew, and I don't hold much hope that it's something truly amazing. The other 2, however, were inside a locked chest guarded by their boss. I swear by Marin, this was the name of a deity I'd heard earlier, and I was pretty sure I'd heard it in the beta as well, that this is the full truth. I am willing to part with 1 of the 3 potions, and I am willing to let luck decide which one. So, what do you say? All these items, 25 silver pieces, and 1 of these potions, decided by chance. She let out a delighted little laugh and said,
Oh, and here this was shaping up to be another dull day in the shop. All right, you can count me in.
I quickly borrowed 3 large mugs from her, and asking her to turn around for a moment, stealthily arranged the 3 potions before asking her to turn around. I then shuffled the 3 mugs around a few times, making sure that the potion the kobold had dropped ended right in front of me, and waited for her decision. After hemming and hawing for a bit, she turned over the middle mug expectantly, and my mood improved markedly as her face fell. Turning over the 2 other mugs, she then uttered a very ungranny-like curse word and took the potion that she had won. So, Mrs. Bertinga, I'm guessing that means that either all 3 potions were really bad or you made the wrong choice. Could you tell me which it was? She stared at me sharply for a moment before exhaling loudly.
I can't believe I actually fell for a shell game at my age. I'm not going to be a sore loser, however. One thing, though, Arcangelo. Would you be so kind as to tell me how you managed to cheat me?
I never lied to you, Mrs. Bertinga, and I didn't cheat. I still haven't got the faintest clue what the remaining potions are. However, I have once read one thing about persons that you might not know. When presented with a vertical row of choices, a subject is most likely to choose the middle one. That's why I placed the bottle least likely to be worth anything there. That was the truth, at least part of it. The other part I couldn't possibly explain to an NPC, but somehow my high charisma score had made me more aware of my personal bearing and how people interpret it. The way I was standing, close to the counter, feet spread, hands almost flat on the counter but aiming towards the middle mug, was meant to impart my grasping for the object, as if reluctant to let it go. How a bank worker with music and gaming as his only hobbies knew this, I had no idea. Clearly, Exogenic's virtual reality machinery was extremely effective. So was my little con, apparently, as I received 3 pop-ups immediately afterwards. Barter has increased to level 2. Barter has increased to level 3, 29% progress to next level. Gambling has increased to level 2, 10% progress to next level. After she had cooled down a bit, Mrs. Bertinga was not a sore loser by any means, and we spent the next hour and a half chatting amiably over tea as she taught me the basics of how to recognize various basic versions of potions and magic items. Afterwards, I received a lovely stream of pop-ups, informing me of how much I'd learned. Congratulations, you have learned a new subskill to lore. Magic lore. You have gained new knowledge concerning magic, be it magic theory, arcane runes and symbols, magical beasts or items, or other information. Every skill point in your subskill will increase the possibility of your utilizing the knowledge and will also increase the main skill, albeit slowly. Stat: Intelligence. Congratulations, you have learned a new subskill to lore. Crafting lore. You have gained new knowledge concerning crafted items and the crafting processes, be it the crafting of armor, weapons, potions, furniture, or other information. Every skill point in your subskill will increase the possibility of your utilizing the knowledge and will also increase the main skill, albeit slowly. Stat: Intelligence. Both new subskills immediately rose to level 3, and my main lore skill increased to 3 as well. I thanked Mrs. Bertinga profusely before turning towards the exit to leave. Halfway toward the door, I was struck by a thought and turned around. Mrs. Bertinga, mind if I ask you a question of a more personal nature? With a mien caught somewhere between amusement and shock, she responded with a hint of laughter in her voice.
Well, that would certainly depend on the manner of the question, wouldn't it?
I cleared my throat and just jumped into the deep end. I don't doubt for a second that the vast majority of travelers and possibly even part of the locals are entirely fooled by your grandmotherly facade. Your mannerisms are impeccable and entirely convincing. I wouldn't have spotted anything if I wasn't in the business myself, that's for certain. But here's what I don't get. I am sure that you get your share of rough travelers who see a defenseless little old lady and try to take what doesn't belong to them. And this is the personal part. What are you hiding? How do you handle those kinds of situations? For the second time that day, I watched Mrs. Bertinga's facade slip as she froze for a second before erupting in a very unladylike laugh, almost a snort.
Well, that is pretty personal, and very well spotted. You are the first person to see beyond the granny veil for almost 2 years now. It's not a secret to those who are in the know, but I do ask those people to keep it a secret. Here?
She gave me a stern look for emphasis, and I readily agreed. She continued.
I am a cleric, court-trained and all, and pretty damn good at it if you ask me. What does that gain me in a stand-up fight, you might ask? Not that much, admittedly, but it does give me the skills to take a punch while I throw a couple of these on the ground in front of me.
She expertly tossed a couple of iron pellets of different colors to the ground, which rolled straight in my direction. Slightly nonplussed by her action, I kneeled, looking closer at the item in front of me. Iron pellet, unidentified. This looks like an entirely unremarkable iron pellet, shiny, unmarked, and with nothing special about it. Durability, 25 out of 25. I looked up and asked, Interesting. What does it do? Mrs. Bertinga giggled like the oldest schoolgirl in the world.
Oh, I really shouldn't, but...
She cleared her throat and intoned, clearly and precisely,
Primum frigidum.
The result was nothing less than shocking. I felt all my muscles freeze in my kneeling position, and then suddenly the world received a blue-tinted aspect. A debuff appeared in my vision. You have been frozen solid. You are unable to move, cast spells, talk, or do anything that requires physical action. 30 seconds remaining. Hearing it as if from afar, Mrs. Bertinga's giggling moved closer to me. She almost couldn't speak for her giggling.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Arcangelo. If only you could see yourself.
She launched into a new, undignified set of giggles. What a heartless, mean old granny.
Now, while you're standing there with your mouth half opened, just picture exactly what you would do if I had a couple of similar pellets that dispensed fire instead of cold. Oh, that's right, I do. And those are far from my only tricks.
Finally, my muscles unclenched, my debuff disappeared, and I was able to stand up again. I looked warily at Mrs. Bertinga. That is one kindly grandmother I wouldn't want to cross. Ever. I worked my jaw and cleared my throat. I truly hope I'll never have to find out the hard way what other surprises you possess. But if you don't mind me asking, have you made these beauties yourself? I prodded the other pellet cautiously with my toe.
Yes, I'm a tinkerer, son. People come to me and try to sell me all sorts of odds and ends. I find that tinkering with them and coming up with interesting combinations is a wonderful way to relax. I admit it's not as prestigious as creating some shiny, fanciful paladin's breastplate inlaid with mother-of-pearl trimmings or what have you. But I can create some truly versatile and useful items. Why, if you're interested, I might even teach you some of the basics.
Oh, interesting. The tinkerer primary profession might be right up my alley. While most people just sell random crap, such as cold resistance potions and rings that give you minor telekinesis skills or allow you to project your voice, I'd always loved and adored these kinds of items. Used properly, they could get you out of situations that you otherwise wouldn't be able to handle, even if you had bought the newest of war axes. That sounds truly intriguing, Mrs. Bertinga. I might very well take you up on your offer. One shouldn't jump into such a thing as selecting a profession without thinking it all the way through, though, I said, trying very much to disregard exactly how I'd chosen the chronicler profession, or the bard class for that sake. I continued, Could you tell me which other craftsmen you have in town? She put a finger on her lip, mulling it over for a moment.
Craftsman, that means you're not interested in the gathering professions. Well, we have Garrett, our weaponsmith, of course. Then there's his son Lyle, who's aiming to become an armorsmith. Adorable kid, but terribly clumsy. Good old Autoria is the resident sage. But then that might not be an option for you, I hear.
While she was entirely straight-faced, I could see her eyes twinkling. She was definitely enjoying having a laugh at me.
Of course, Greg you already know, our resident alchemist, and Gillam's also a cook. That nasty piece of work Bennett is our leather worker, and Grant Jr., the harbormaster's son, is a tailor. Who does that leave? Have you met Othel? A bit of a scamp, but I like him. Also, he's a scout. Mallard in the temple is our physician, and Navis, that lovely girl, is our woodworker. Oh, and let's not forget our carpenter, Grace. I think those are all.
I thanked her profusely and left the Traveler's Delight, walking straight home where I ordered the hottest bath they could possibly make. This put me back another 10 coppers and left me with just 5 silver and 22 coppers in the purse, but it was totally and undeniably worth it. Positioned in a large tin bathtub filled with steaming hot water in the back room of the Warlock's End, and enjoying life, the universe, and the demise of all fleas, I decided to think about exactly what I wanted for my crafting profession. Unfortunately, what with the realism and all, there was still no comprehensive, frequently asked questions or anything on World of Chains, but luckily my time with the beta had taught me a thing or two regarding the available professions. Apparently not enough, given my complete bafflement concerning the existence of the Chronicler and Tinkerer classes. But hey, it should be enough for me to make a pretty informed decision. The existing primary professions, to my knowledge, were weaponsmith. Kind of self-explanatory, hammering out weapons on a forge, All due respect for people who are into this kind of thing, plus you can create some really impressive custom-made weapons. But this was simply not for me. Working with bloody big hammers for hours and hours on end and being certain that you'd end up with a number of unsightly burn scars. Seriously, look at any smith. They all have them. Bloody masochists. Armorer. Same as the weaponsmith, only insert metal armors and shields instead of weapons. Same conclusion as well. Also, whatever metal armor I'd decide to create would be too heavy for me. Leatherworker. Typically, a bard would carry medium armor, leather or mail, but if I was going to avoid close combat and play the class mage style, I might as well steer clear of any kinds of armor that might slow me down. Apart from leather armor and a few other odds and ends, for instance, leatherworkers do create some wonderful weight-reducing backpacks, this was not enough for me to elect this profession. Tailor. Now, this could very well be a decent possibility. Tailors create custom clothes and cloaks, certain bags, and various other items, typically for mages. Maybe I could make myself some plus sonic damage and plus charisma items, or something along that line. Woodworker. Yeah, I want to work my wood all night. Sorry about that. Apparently my subconscious doesn't get enough fresh air. They create bows, arrows, spears, and wooden shields. My old rogue was a woodworker, and it served him well, especially the ability to create quality arrows on the cheap was a good match for him. With this character, not that great a match. Carpenter. A carpenter is exactly what it sounds like. That guy who makes your rocking chair, wardrobe, and other furniture. Some people just loved decorating their own virtual homes. Me? I preferred to go to a tavern where somebody had done the decorating for me, or maybe hiring someone to do it for me. Alchemist. That guy who makes potions with really weird effects and also poisons. I would most likely choose this class for the thousands of possibilities that were great to have in the right situation, only the trainer was frigging, I don't trust you as far as I can carry you, Grek. Also, before I figured out whether I could trust him, I wasn't exactly going to ask him for instructions on how to mix volatile liquids. Then there's the part where I wasn't too certain whether I really wanted to receive any recipes from someone who seemed to be a functional alcoholic. Cook. While I actually love to cook in real life, somehow this hasn't translated over into the game. Sure, the benefits and buffs you could gain were awesome, but I've always preferred versatility over buffs. Also, I was pretty sure that if I asked really nicely, I could just buy some good stuff from Gillum. Physician. I've been told that this is the profession to choose if you solo a lot, which I am likely going to, and get into a lot of battles, which I am definitely going to avoid. Bandages, cures for poison and illnesses, compressions, poultices, and lots of other stuff I know next to nothing about. Probably leeches, too. Scout. I really liked the scout profession. It just wasn't for me. It gives you a ton of items to craft for when you're in the wilderness. Want some tripwires and alarms to create a really defensible camp? Scout. Better gear for on the road? Scout. Improved binoculars? Well, you get the general idea. If you wanted to go hiking, you'd want to have a scout along with you. Sage. Yeah, this might have been a great way to learn more spells and learn how to scribe spells, but that old biddy of a mayor wasn't going to train me any day soon, to be sure. Too bad, really. They also give access to some sorts of arcane thingies that I've only heard rumors about, like portal scrolls and really weird enchanting add-ons. Conclusion? Gnomes suck. Jeweler. The only class that didn't have a trainer in Grant's Crossing. Just my luck. I mean, yeah, I totally got it. Why would the profession in the game with the most expensive goods settle down in the middle of a forest where you'd be sure that your clientele was severely limited? But still, this profession really speaks to me. You could create a lot of plus charisma or plus endurance rings to wear, and still have a minor invisibility necklace to slip on if you were in a bind. If only... Somebody ought to offer me some cheese with this wine. Tinkerer. Odds and ends, trinkets and baubles of various effects. Hell if I knew anything else. But the class sure seemed intriguing and promising. Where did this leave me? Tailor, alchemist, sage, jeweler, and tinkerer were the only professions I liked, and only tailor, alchemist, and tinkerer were a real possibility. I made a solemn promise to myself to look further into these 3 professions on the next day. Now it was time to get out of the bath, to get into my new clothes, and have a look at the loot which I had identified. With satisfaction, I looked at my new clothes before putting them on. A matching set of relatively rough-spun, yet stylish cotton clothes, cut in the same style in a darkish green, with low boots and a red scarf just to prevent the outfit from being boring. Fancy traveler's clothes. This matching set of clothes is made from relatively rough-spun cotton cloths, which have been stylishly cut in a matching style with a thought for the overall effect. The dark green of the clothes goes well along with the darn brown boots, and the red silk scarf adds just a splash of color. Silk scarf. Durability, 10 out of 10. Cotton pants. Durability, 25 out of 25. Cotton shirt. Durability, 25 out of 25. Low leather boots. Durability, 30 out of 30. Set item bonus, +1 charisma, +1 luck. 4 items equipped. Workmanship, average. That was it. No more looking like a bum for me. I already felt like a new person. Now for the rest of the stuff I'd bought. Utility items mostly. I'd gotten myself a woolen blanket for warmth or cover, flint and steel, a crowbar, some torches and bandages, and quill, ink, and parchment. Oh, and a piece of chalk for messages or whatever needed to be marked. There was a lot of other stuff I'd love to have, but I had to face the facts. At the moment, my wallet was too slim to pay for any more, and my arms were too slim to carry all that I wanted to bring along anyway. I did feel a terrible premonition that my excursion would end up like that ancient favorite game of mine, Fallout 2, where going anywhere without a rope was the same as saying, "Nah, I'm not that interested in any of the good loot. I'll just stay up here and look at that intriguing hole in the floor." Properly attired for my upcoming adventures, and with the basest basics covered, it was time for the good stuff. I'd always done this, I mused, saving the good stuff for last. Even as a child, when I had a candy bag, I'd leave all the best stuff for last. Now, I could only hope that it was worth the wait. Now to see the potions that managed to get a rise out of Mrs. Bertinga and the 2 magic items. Minor Potion of Spider Grip. Allows you to hang on to most anything and climb almost like a spider for the duration of the potion. You can climb along any plane and material. The strength of the potion eliminates the possibility of climbing upside down. Duration, 4 minutes. Potion of Grease. Throwing the bottle at an area covers the area in a thick, oily substance which is slippery enough to make it almost impossible to pass on foot. The substance is very sensitive to fire. Area covered, circle, 3-meter radius. Duration, 3 minutes. Now that's what I'm talking about. Tiny items which somebody might just sell for a bit of cash. Well, actually, quite a decent amount of cash. I knew the grease potions were pretty popular in player versus player combat, PvP, but used in the right spot, they might just save your bacon. The magic items, however, actually made me clap my hands in childish glee. Tin Ring of Minor Haste. This ring, in itself, is not particularly interesting, a simple tin ring with a curved pattern. It has been enhanced with a minor enchantment. Range, touch. Increases run speed by 50% for 30 seconds upon activation. 5 out of 5 uses. Bronze Ring of Amiability. This bronze ring is quite pleasing to the eye. The ring itself is thick and unadorned, but the bronze has a bright and warm sheen to it that draws the eye when you focus on it. +2 to diplomacy and barter skills. I equipped both right away. The bronze ring played right to my strengths, and the tin ring, well, You never knew when you'd have to run away from some slavering beast. That was it. I felt as ready as I was going to get. I'd just check on the quests that I had, and then see whether I'd be able to complete one of the grinding quests and earn myself a little cash. Opening the quest journal, I quickly perused the few quests I had available to me. Greg wanted me to discover who was responsible for holding back the progress in Grant's Crossing, and Mallard, the local priest, wanted to know if there was some sort of threat looming over the village. Chertog, the gravedigger, wanted me to look into disappearing bodies, and then I'd have to look into what happened back when Gillem's mother was killed. Lastly, I had one standard hack-and-slash quest, where I had to kill off some local feral cats. Basically, it looked like I'd have a lot of opportunities to talk to a lot of people and exploit my high charisma. Well, except for the darn kids quest, which would probably end up concerning the living dead. In every game I'd ever played, graveyard quests equaled zombies or skeletons. But right at that moment, I really felt like trying out my new equipment and whacking some poor mobs. This made for an easy choice. It was time to smoke some cats. Itching to get moving, dish out an unfair amount of pain, and collect mountains of loot, I left Grant's Crossing with my intentions fixed on flattening a bunch of feral cats. How hard could it be? I figured. As I'd both gained a level and some new items, I figured that it would be a cakewalk. An hour and a half later found me placed behind my desk in the Warlock's End, gazing blankly at nothing with my head in my hands. While, ostensibly, I was trying to figure out how to do better next time, my mind kept circling around the humiliation of having my ass handed to me by a bunch of goddamn level 1 cats. Sure, there were a couple of redeeming factors. For instance, when the quest stated feral cats, I'd imagined just that, a common house cat with a bad attitude. What I got instead was a feral lynx, a 35-kilogram bastard offspring between a tiger, a tsunami, and a blender. The first encounter had actually gone over rather well. I spotted a lynx in a clearing, busy feeding from the corpse of what looked like an elk. This should probably have been the first red flag, the fact that a smallish creature such as this had been able to take down as large an animal as an elk. Instead, I pressed on to the attack, and a quick combo of well-placed spells resulted in the corpse of the lynx coming to rest nearly at my feet. Instead of gloating over my first kill, I might also have spent a moment considering a few other things. The speed of the charging lynx and how it had almost reached me, despite the element of surprise, how it had almost evaded my second sonic missile, and, last but not least, how many feline species tend to hunt in packs. Well, much to my detriment, my large reserve of knowledge on games and monster behavior in general was no good when I failed to stop to think. My memory of the events following my first kill were somewhat blurred, and what did stand out, I would not have minded forgetting again straight away, such as my high-pitched squeal at watching 2 lynx charging at me from the undergrowth, or learning the hard way that a lynx is actually a better climber than me. An image for the ages, that one, featuring one lynx clawing bloody furrows in my pant legs from the ground, and the other jumping straight up the trunk of the tree in 3 bounds to swipe at me from above. Or, and to this day this memory never fails to make me wince, how my uncontrolled flailing from a low branch actually managed to connect a weak kick with the lynx on the ground, earning me the brawling skill. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill: brawling. A brawling master needs no weapons. He is a weapon himself. Every skill point in brawling will increase the blunt damage that you do in unarmored combat. Stat: strength. In the end, I had been forced to use a charge from my tin ring of minor haste in order to be able to run away and escape, only with heavy damage to my health, self-esteem, and pants. My new pants, damn it! When confronted with a difficult problem, it has always helped me to write it out for myself, and this time was no different. After a while, I leaned back and looked at the neat little list I had made for myself. Problem number 1. Too little agility and weapon skill to properly hit enemies, especially fast enemies. Number 2. Not enough endurance and armor to truly take a punch, or claws and teeth, as it were. Number 3. Not enough strength to effectively subdue smaller animals such as these. Number 4. I'm built like a glass cannon, but cannot kill them with one shot. Solution? Question mark. I spent a while looking back and forth between my character sheet and my list, looking for possible solutions and bypasses to my problem. Anybody able to listen to my rambling internal monologue at that moment would probably doubt my sanity, with the actual moment where I was struck by an epiphany sounding something like this. Just no frigging way. Agility's out. Maybe go back to the real world. I'll never be able to make it by myself. I'd have to... Wait, back up. By myself. A wide smile dawned on my face, and I leaned forward on the desk and joyfully wrote 2 words in caps after the word solution. Meet Shield. I don't know how I had missed it. The solution for soft characters and glass cannons, high-damaging characters with low defensive abilities and hit points, since time immemorial. Someone big and brawny to hide behind while firing happily away with the high-damage spells. Now, I only had to find someone who fit the bill, and who wouldn't mind taking a lot of hits on my behalf, preferably for next to no payment. Most likely, this would require some planning for it to work well. Luckily, I had the perfect accomplice to help me in my endeavor. Chapter 13. Arcangelo Needs You. Letting my weary carcass drop down onto a bar stool, I decided to go with the direct approach. Hey, Gillum, remember how you promised me that you'd answer any stupid question I could come up with and you couldn't ever get annoyed? Gillum barked a laugh and shot back.
Well, that's not exactly what I remember promising. But sure, I'll answer a couple of questions.
I nodded gratefully at him and dove in. So, this might be a weird question, but how come I haven't seen any Reborn in town? A short explanation is probably due. Reborn is the name that NPCs use for players, of course due to our propensity to not stay dead. Oh, and because all players start their life fully grown, but without any skills, past, or experience, the urban legend goes that we are all reborn from an earlier life, a new soul in an existing body. A lot of histories, rumors, and prejudices are associated with reborn adventurers, and it's not everywhere on the continent you want to disclose that you are one. Why? Well, because players tend to introduce chaos to most situations. Even when we behave nicely, which is rarely a given, a reborn in your neighborhood can mean anything from having a murder solved to half the district burning down. You never know. This was also why, when I was able to, I tried to keep my status on the down low. It had kept me out of trouble a number of times inside World of Chains. As far as I knew, however, not many players bothered to do this, and most actually reveled in the attention, positive or negative. I must have looked nervous, because Gillum smirked at me and said,
Don't you worry, Arcangelo. We already know that you're a reborn. Nobody around here holds it against you.
Seeing that I was about to say something, he continued.
Seriously, arriving at the village totally clueless and starting out by harassing the mayor was a bit of a giveaway. And you might have ended in some trouble if you had continued along that line. But now we know you're an all-right fellow. To answer your question, we do get reborn here from time to time, maybe once a week or so. Thing is, though, they tend to gravitate away from the village as fast as possible. I can hardly blame the spellcasters. I mean, we don't even have a library here. But it seems like no one is truly interested in getting to know the village and the people here. Their loss.
The halfling stopped talking for a moment, with his mouth set in a hard line before exhaling loudly.
Anyway, We have a standing agreement where the newcomers are allowed to make use of the mayor's portal facilities if they perform a number of tasks for the village in order to recuperate some of the costs involved. And, of course, as a way of getting someone else to do some of the hard and dirty work in the village.
He winked at me.
Basically, there's just one reborn lately who's chosen to stick around. A hunter. And she spends the majority of her time outside the village. In truth, I get the feeling that she rather dislikes other people. Reborn or no.
That brought a slight frown to my face. My first choice would probably have been teaming up with another player, but then again, in this manner, I wouldn't have to try to explain how I'd landed in the present situation. Gathering my thoughts, I asked, "Some people from around the village have been asking me to help with a number of things, and to lay it out there, Gil, I can't do it by myself. Mind if I use the stage tonight after my performance to ask for help?" He shrugged.
Feel free. I should warn you, however, that it's going to be a hard sell. Most of the locals tend to prefer the safety of the village. I don't think you're going to get any help here.
I rubbed my hands together. You just wait and see, Gillum. One just needs to lay the proper groundwork. Oh, and before I forget, my room really feels too empty and forlorn. Mind if I drag up some of the stuff that's slowly rotting away in your lost and found room to make it look like someone's actually inhabiting the room? Gillum had already turned away to start polishing at something, but waved his hand dismissively at me over his shoulder.
No problem. But if you break something, you buy it.
I allowed myself the luxury of relaxing for a midday meal, but following that, I basically spent every available moment until the evening preparing my approach and pitch. I did also, finally, manage to track down Greg and ask him politely to make some time for me, in his capacity as my teacher. His muttered reply was unintelligible, something about
making it worth the hassle first.
But the pop-up I received made his position pretty clear. You have been offered a quest. Quid pro quo. Repeatable. Greg Durzum will deign to spend some of his time teaching you about the finer arts of being a bard in exchange of fair incentive. Bring him some alcohol of acceptable quality in order to secure one bard class lesson. The length and quality of your lesson will depend on what you bring. Reward: 100 experience points, plus 100 reputation with Greg Durzum. Accept or decline. I swallowed my automatic response, telling him off for being the world's most horrible teacher. I knew most of his actions were nothing more than acting and keeping his cover. I just really wished he wasn't so damn talented at behaving like an ass. In the end, I merely accepted the quest and left. It took a while to simmer down and get back to the work at hand, but in the end, when the crowd started to enter the inn in ones and twos, I felt pretty prepared. Allowing the crowd time to eat, talk, and relax, I just sat on the stage and from time to time played a few short ditties on the violin. Without the bow, just string work, pizzicato style. The sound it creates on a violin is pretty reminiscent to a guitar, and I love the variety of sounds it allows you to incorporate into the music. As before, I waited until most people were almost finished eating before I addressed the crowd. I've always claimed that music from computer games and movies is among the most underrated music in the world. Overall, I find that it comes in two categories. In-your-face, insistent and loud music, announcing to the world that now is the time to fear for your life, now is the time to feel very, very afraid, or the kind of game and movie music I've always preferred. Quiet, unassuming, slowly insinuating itself upon you, influencing a certain mood or feeling without you even taking heed. In that moment, I finally had the opportunity to check out whether its effect held true in the real world. Well, a virtual world anyway, but it felt real. I opened with one of my favorite examples of the former, the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Loud, epic, and adventurous, it definitely served to catch their attention. When the scattered applause had died down, I told the crowd, "Tonight, my friends, I would like to talk about heroes." I continued telling them how a society's heroes and legends tells much about its people, and how I would very much love to hear more about them and get to know them all a bit better. Of course, it would be bad taste of me to just lean back and let everybody else do all the telling, and therefore I would like to start out with a tale from my own home, which lies very far from here. I told them a short story I'd partially made up for the moment, concerning the abduction of children and women from a local town by the L, a magical, bewitching, and seductive people with hollow backs, which range back to the Danish Viking Age, and how a clever duo of local farmers had taken it upon themselves to bring back the captured people and succeeded where both the local knight and priest failed. After finishing, I asked for input from the crowd, and after a short while, the cry went up.
Shertog!
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 Yes, Shertog, you got tons of stories.
After a bit of persuasion, the elderly dwarf surrendered and took his place on the stage. He told a captivating story from his dwarven home about the near extermination of his entire clan by a marauding horde of barbarous catfolk. While he narrated, I started playing softly, not interrupting his story, but trying to enhance the mood. The crowd listened intently, learning how a small group of 5 dwarves had successfully held back the horde for 2 hours, allowing the remainder of the clan to escape to safety through a narrow cave opening. In the end, however, the small group succumbed to the horde. Applauding along with the rest, I thanked him profusely. I said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. A tale such as this not only teaches us about the past of Chertog's clan, it also enlightens us about which traits are important among his clan. And as such, it goes way beyond simple entertainment." I continued, addressing the crowd. "How about the heroes of Ion? Letting your elders do all the work is bad manners. Isn't there one of you young folks who could entertain the rest of us with a tale of the greatest heroes of the world?" A silence filled the crowd, until a small voice was heard and a young girl asked,
Do you know the tale of the Royal Cabal and the separation?
I indicated that I didn't and waved her over for her to take over the stage. Blushing a furious red, she climbed the stage and stood in the middle, hands behind her back, and looked down for a while before starting out.
Once upon a time, the world was whole and hale. All sorts of races lived together, wielding a plethora of magics and mastering technologies unknown to us today. Sometimes we had harmony, sometimes we suffered from war, but above and beyond all, life flourished on Neyrus.
A number of people in the crowd murmured,
As it shall be once again.
Apparently, this was not just any old story. I refrained from playing this time around. I'd better not mess up some unspoken ritual concerned with the story.
The separation was upon us without warning. We do not know where it originated, nor where it struck first. We could only observe its effect.
She gracefully knelt, letting one arm extend before her, indicating each corner of the compass in turn.
Everything, everywhere, from the ever-burning fire mills in the north to the southern swampland, the world tore itself apart.
A darker day was never seen.
She rose again, face downturned and solemn.
Much was lost that day, lives, land, riches, and wisdom. The wise men of the world were confounded, and mages, priests, and scholars alike acted in panic, doing their utmost to halt the destruction of our world, to no effect. Our downfall was nigh, but then the royal cabal of Borshan came to our defense.
Blessed be they.
The girl looked up, a proud mien spreading on her features.
At great cost to themselves, they managed to stop the onslaught of the destruction and keep our world afloat, despite the evil forces doing their all to tear everything apart. They are the reason we remain in the sky.
Blessed be they.
Smiling softly at us all, she finished.
The Cabal remain our guardians and our hope. Every day they toil to reclaim the heavens and reunite us to the remainder of Neyrus. Give them their due, everybody, because they are the ones who will bring back what is lost.
At this, she went to her knees, spread her arms in a supplicating gesture, and led the final chant, where she spoke a sentence and the crowd responded.
Cabal, protect us.
Blessed be they.
Cabal, guide us.
Blessed be they.
Cabal, save us.
Blessed be they. Clapping politely with the rest of the crowd, I did not expect the pop-up that entered my view at that point. You have been offered a quest, the beginning and the end. Chronicler Quest. You have received a glance of the story behind the separation. Uncover the entire story as it is told today. Reward. Unknown. Accept or decline. I quickly pressed accept, not sparing the quest a whole lot of thought. I was focused on the crowd and how exactly to move on. Jumping back onto the stage, I solemnly said, "Thank you very much for that. I suppose it's only fair that I take my turn now?" I was met by a number of exclamations, such as,
Yeah! Go on, Archangelo!
"Quit your yapping and play a summon already!" The last person was quickly shushed down, however. I grinned at the offender and announced, "Luckily, I'll be able to oblige you all this time. My next story is in the form of a ballad. This is a song from home, which, while sad, tells a lot about where I come from. It's called Utah Carol." I then proceeded to play the story of a rider who mourned the loss of his partner who'd died to save a little girl from a stampeding herd of cattle. Played on the violin instead of on a guitar, as the original was, I tried my best to imbue this song with an additional sense of mourning and loss. This has never been the easiest of things for me, as I tend to lose myself in the song when I improvise, and when the bow forced out the final verse, I felt drained from the effort. I spent a moment just staring at my feet before gathering my thoughts and looking up at the applauding crowd. I gave them a half smile, still somewhat caught up in the mood, and told them, "This song tells a lot about where I come from. It tells us that we, as Chertog's clan, honor our fallen heroes." I gave a nod in Chertog's direction. "It tells us that we put the lives of our children above our own." Here, I smiled at the small girl who'd told the story earlier. "And finally, it tells us that you don't need to be a knight in shining armor to be a hero. It might just as well be the person who works at your side, day in, day out." I waited for a few moments, letting it sink in before clearing my throat. Well, enough sadness for today. There's still one story I plan to get from you today. Please, tell me about the heroes of Grant's Crossing. This was met by complete and utter silence. Nobody seemed to see what I was aiming at. Their gazes slowly drifted either down to the floor or over at Chertog, as if asking him to take over. He seemed lost in thought for a bit as well, before suddenly realizing how many people were staring imploringly at him. He coughed and spoke to the room.
Stop looking at me like that already. You all know I haven't been chronicling much of what's happening here.
I encouraged the crowd a bit. Come on, you've managed to erect a well-functioning village in the middle of one of the largest, most dangerous forests on Ion. And despite being few inhabitants, you managed to keep trade flowing between the East and the West. Are you really claiming that this has happened without any heroics? At this, everybody started talking at once, recalling past stories, achievements, and heroics. After a minute or so, I managed to shout down the crowd and convince them to have a go one at a time. When I had planned it out, this was exactly the outcome I'd been hoping for everyone to realize that a lot of the villagers had actually committed heroic deeds at some point. What I hadn't expected was how touching it all was. We had Gillam's son, Jeb, talking about a reborn who had saved him from a feral dog, and how he'd never learned his name. A misty-eyed Mrs. Bertinga spoke at length about how a local druid had risked her life without any recompense to bring her the ingredients for a medicine during an epidemic, and even the usually bitter and taciturn catfolk hunter, who the villagers had nicknamed Sourpuss, explained how Ethel had once saved him when he'd managed to enrage a huge boar, and apologized directly to Ethel for never having thanked him properly. You might have been present at a family reunion or the like, where usually after the introduction of copious amounts of alcohol, every resentment, hatred, and forgotten grudge from the past comes to light. That is exactly what this was, but only as a glorious, heartfelt opposite. Quite a few of the stories left me with tears in my eyes, and after only a couple of stories, I decided to stop playing and just let the villagers have this moment. A couple of hours later, I started to see a few yawns around the room, and once the current speaker had finished, I attended the crowd with my address. Before you all leave, I wanted to thank you very much for sharing these stories, your stories, with me. I have one final inquiry, however. I aim to follow your examples and strive to improve Grant's Crossing, and have a number of ideas in mind. The first, to remove the feral lynx which have been harassing our hunter. At this, I nodded at Sourpuss. I continued. I cannot do it alone, however. I need a companion, someone who can shield my back while we both work for the common good of the village. Please come see me afterwards if you think this could be you. Whatever risk there is, we will share along with the well-earned rewards. Now, no more talking from me. You've left me hoarse enough that my last song tonight will be instrumental. As I bid them good night, with what is probably my favorite recurring song from a game series, The Ballad of the Goddess, I could hear the chatter from the crowd. While it might just be wishful thinking, I couldn't help but feel like I had caught the attention of the villagers with my plea. The only thing that was left for me was the hope that somebody in the town had the guts, or the lack of common sense, to assist me. The final joyous tones from the song faded away, and I spent my time packing up. When I looked up, I could see 3 people waiting for me in front of the stage. While I kept my face carefully neutral, my inside voice did a giant whoop of joy. It had worked. I took my time speaking with all 3, getting to know their stories, strengths, and weaknesses. In game terms, apart from the discussions, this also grants you limited access to the character sheet of the NPC who tells you about himself. The person who surprised me the most by volunteering was actually the very same Sourpuss who'd given me the quest to kill the lynx, the village's hunter and skinner. The elderly catfolk by the name Benneth Stoll had apparently felt shamed by my speech and wanted to give something back to Grant's Crossing. Unfortunately, however, I felt that I had to turn him down. From what I'd heard around town, his traps and hunting actually provided quite a bit of the provender that the village needed to manage, and I probably wouldn't want to be the reason that everybody suddenly had to make do without meat or warm pelts for the winter. At this point, I spent a short moment marveling at my behavior. Was I really spending time considering the ethical ramifications of my choice? I reminded myself that this was still a game, no matter how realistic and well-polished, and the end game, as far as I was concerned, was still unchanged. Babes and brewskis. I did, however, still let Sourpuss go. I wouldn't want the negative reputation hit his death would undoubtedly bring me. The 2 remaining choices before me were: character info. Name, Lyle Brennathan. Race, human. Class, Knight, level 1. Experience towards next level, 0 out of 1,000. Crafting class, Armorer, Apprentice. Gathering class, Mining, Novice. Stats and attributes, Health, 150 out of 150. Mana, 80 out of 80. Stamina, 150 out of 150. Strength, 15. Perception, 8. Endurance, 15. Charisma, 10. Intelligence, 8. Agility, 8. Luck, 5. Skills. Skill name: Armorsmithing, level 12. Barter, 4. Blunt weapons, 1. Heavy armor, 3. Lore, 5. Local lore Dawnlight Forest, 8. Crafting lore, 10. Groupings, 2. History, 11. Magic lore, 3. Religion, 2. Mining, 3. Spot, 1. Traits and achievements: Jack of all trades. Humans are proficient with any manner of skills. Skill increases are 2% more likely to happen. Well-liked. Humans are universally well-liked, plus 10% to any reputation gain. Sign of the Bear. Once a day, gain plus 10 endurance for 60 seconds. In shining armor, knights tend to spend a lot of time in their armor and are able to use it more effectively than most other classes. Plus 5 AC. Clumsy. You are clumsier than most, or just plain unlucky. You're more apt to skin your knee, drop your knife, or stumble. The bad side to this is that it seems to have become a permanent thing. The good side is that your numerous incidents have hardened you beyond the usual. You gain minus 5 luck, but plus 3 endurance and a plus 5 to any roll to resist pain. Lyle was, well, everything about him just screamed that this was a good kid. He was kind and shy, the type you'd never hear talking loudly in public. He had an open, honest face, with the kind of curly, unruly hair that every parent just has to ruffle. Oh, and he was almost 2 meters tall, with long, brawny arms and a broad chest. Apparently, he'd been itching for the possibility to get out there and do good for a long while, but had never found a good chance before now. Character info: name Bertold Garderson. Race dwarf. Warrior level 3. Experience towards next level 2,240 out of 3,000. Crafting class woodworker, novice. Gathering class none. Stats and attributes: health 160 out of 160. Mana 80 out of 80. Stamina 160 out of 160. Strength 16, Perception 9, Endurance 16, Charisma 10, Intelligence 8, Agility 10, Luck 10. Skills. Skill name: Barter level 2. Lore 1. Crafting lore 1. Geography 2. Local lore Dawnlight Forest 2. Slashing weapons 6. One-handed weapon and shield 2. Two weapons 4. Flurry of blows 1. Two-handed weapon 8. Rushed attack 2. Woodworking 5. Traits and achievements: tough meat. Dwarves, while small in stature, are a tough race. They gain plus 1 endurance for each level. An eye for detail. Regardless of their chosen path, dwarves who dedicate their lives to crafting tend to excel at it. Plus 5% chance at creating an improved workmanship result when crafting. Natural-born warrior. You have an instinctive understanding for martial arts and weapon skills. Skill increases on any combat skill are 5% more likely to happen. Achievements: Berserker. There is a slight chance for you to go berserk whenever you are damaged in battle. When berserk, your damage increases by 20% and you receive 20% spell resistance for the duration of the battle. You cannot, however, use any combat skills, as you are completely lost to the blood and mayhem. Bloody Mess. You've had your fair share of battle, blood, and gore, and you've come to like it. You receive plus 2 to all melee-based skills once the blood starts flowing on the field. If one were to take Lyle and consider how to find his exact opposite, well, they'd end up with a woman, but disregarding that, Bertold might just fit the bill. Where Lyle was tall and blonde, Bertold was short and swarthy. Lyle was soft-spoken and well-mannered. Bertold was loud and boisterous. Bertold was one of the 2 brothers in town who owned the barracks/mercenary guild that they'd aptly named Blood Brothers. Like he said, however, it was not much of a guild, nor had it ever been. There weren't that many mercenaries to hire around here, just the brothers and a few hangers-on, like Kiff from the tavern. His reasons for wanting to join up were,
Same as always, I guess. Herbert, brother dear, and I are a bit drunk and bored, and we get into a bit of a tussle. I knock him out and, well, I'm still drunk and bored, right? So I shave off half his hair. Long story short, I need something to keep me occupied for a bit, and from what I've heard around town, you're working with the priest to figure out what's killing off the trade. This'll probably even earn me extra money in the end.
If I looked at the stats and skills only, there was no discussion. Bertold was tougher, more skilled, and didn't have that annoying clumsy trait. Also, Odds were people wouldn't miss him as much as Lyle if I were to get him killed. Except, I didn't like him. Something about him just felt off to me. It was hard to explain. It kind of felt like lying in your bed at night and suddenly feeling like there's someone in the room with you, a sort of fundamental unease. Well, that and the bloody mess achievement, that was deeply disturbing as well. Being a game and all, I really should just have chosen the better stats, but whatever had brought me thus far along the bard path I'd been following had come due to me disregarding common game terms and acting on my feelings and hunches. And somehow, I had the feeling that behind the clumsiness and eager visage of Lyle, which made me think of a puppy for some reason, rested a brilliant tank to be. He would probably need to be housebroken first, however. I turned down Bertold as gently as possible, and I actually thought he took it rather nicely. His only comments were,
Fine. Gives me more time for drinking. Look me up once the kid is pushing daisies, and you've been reborn a time or three.
Later, I agreed upon the fine print of my agreement with Lyle. Basically, we would split any money we found 50-50, and any items we were to find which he could use, he'd have first picks on. Anything that we both could use, we'd throw in a pile and take turns choosing. While this sounds fair enough, he was undoubtedly getting the short end of the stick since a huge part of all loot usually arrived as vendor trash, which I'd keep for myself. Did I feel a few pangs of conscience at this? Sure did, but not enough to question or remedy this unexpected windfall. We agreed that we'd meet the next morning at 9, ready to go, packed up with everything we could think would be of use. The moment I saw Lyle walking towards the door, practically floating with joy, I allowed myself a couple of minutes of pure relaxation. I ordered a lager from Gillum and walked up to my room, threw myself down into the chair and smacked my boots up on the table, and just enjoyed the beer with nothing at all inside my mind, completely blanked out. After a while, the silence got to me, and it was as if I could hear the sound of some thought pinging around inside my skull. Bing! Dude. Bing! Check out the loot. Blong! Else I'm not going away. I shook my head, trying to clear away the cobwebs and other unwanted intruders from my mind, and got down to business. First and foremost, the cash. I checked what the crowd had left in my guitar case. Scatter-minded moron that I was, I hadn't even checked it after my last performance. I'd been that tired. Ah, well, that left me with a decent pile of small coins, 2 silver and 46 copper to be exact. Apparently, the crowd still liked me. Sure, I could expect the amount to lower with time, but it was nice to know that I probably wouldn't run entirely out of cash while I was playing at the inn. The other day, I'd fiddled around with the setting for the pop-ups because they could be very distracting when I was performing, or otherwise in the middle of something demanding my full attention. Essentially, gaining new skills and skill levels wouldn't pop up until I checked manually, and as for all other pop-ups, if I dismissed one, all except critical pop-ups, for instance, excepting a portal spell cast on me, would stay minimized until I checked them. The net result for the evening was 2 skill-ups for local lore, 2 new lore sub-skills, religion and history, 2 increases for musician, hell yeah, and 1 to performing and singing each. While this was all nice and good, I forgot about it the moment I checked out the next 2 pop-ups. The first one was a very intriguing quest which could probably net a nice reward without having to submit myself to danger, but the second was incredible. You have been offered a quest. How the Crossing Came to Be. Chronicler Quest. You have learned a smattering of stories about the past of Grant's Crossing. The origin and creation of Grant's Crossing has never been officially chronicled. Compile the true story from the perspective of each of the 4 founders and reveal it to the village at Reveler's Moon. Reward unknown. Accept or decline. You have earned an achievement. Bringer of Joy. You have shown through your actions that you are able to bring people together and a joy to the crowds wherever you go. Reputation gained while performing or playing is increased by 25%. As the icing on the proverbial cake, I received a whopping increase to rep, plus 650 to reputation with Gillum, and 325 with the rest of Grant's Crossing. While I couldn't exactly claim that everything was progressing with lightning speed, I sure felt like I was getting somewhere. Apart from this, things were progressively getting more interesting. Who'd have thought that there'd be as much drama, hidden information, and deep quest lines in a tiny village such as this? I'd probably end up enjoying the time I was going to spend here until I got the chance to leave for a real city. A notion I had not seen coming when I first figured out that I was stranded. That night, just before turning in, I was standing at the open window, softly playing to myself some of my favorite game music, the main theme from Final Fantasy VII. The night was feeling particularly peaceful, and there even was a scattering of different animals close by, giving everything a suitable Disney feel. I swear, a large lizard on the opposite roof even seemed to nod in time to the music. In short, I felt really good about myself when I went to bed. Chapter 14. Into the Woods. I awoke early the following day, well-rested and in an extraordinarily good mood. It felt like something had finally clicked, and things were going to go my way. I stretched, spending a moment to think how weird it was that my brain somehow still passed on the desire to stretch after a period of rest, when my body was placed inside a full-immersion tank. Feeling the need to relax and reward myself with a little downtime, I decided to dedicate a little time to getting comfortably installed in my room. Half an hour and 2 trips to the lost and found room later, I stepped back, admiring my room, which, for the first time, actually felt like my room. Seeing as how my room was the last room on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall just under the roof, both side walls slanted inwards. On one side, I had my cot, filled with fresh straw and a large woolen blanket for chilly nights, and on the other, a large draw chest with room to spare for all my earthly belongings. There was no lock for the chest, but then again, at this point I owned nothing worth stealing, except for Greg's old violin. The back wall was dominated by a large circular window, and the center of the room was occupied by an old dark wood desk. All in all, the result had been quite Spartan, but the cellar had been a treasure trove, and had turned out 2 warm animal pelts for the floor, an old map of the Dawnlight Forest, a couple of candlesticks to cover the splintered and worn table, and a handful of nails. This allowed me to hang the violin case on one side of the window and the short bow on the other side. It wasn't that I actually thought that I'd ever get to use the short bow, but I appreciated the balance in the room. Music on one side, violence on the other. Nodding in satisfaction, I went down to the tavern room to get some breakfast and meet up with Lyle. I'm not entirely sure what I'd expected from Lyle, but from his earlier exuberance, I'd had at the very least expected him to show up. I'd spent a slow morning in the tavern's main room, enjoying myself over a slow breakfast, and afterwards passing the time good-naturedly pestering Jeb for local information. I received a smattering of mixed information on the local flora and fauna, local monsters, rumors, as well as solid fact interspersed, it seemed, and more intel on what was happening locally. Long story short, trade was slowing down to a trickle, and no one seemed to know why, although rumors of highwaymen were rampant. Leaving the tavern in search for Lyle, I received a pop-up rewarding my effort with an increase to local lore. The morning sun shone in my eyes, and the sky promised a gentle spring day with little to no rain. On my way over to the smithy, I chanced upon the first reborn I'd seen since arriving at Grant's Crossing. Physically, there was no way to tell an NPC from a reborn, but these 2 were a dead giveaway. One was a half-orc who was plodding along, gesturing wildly with his arms in the retelling of some story. The other was a halfling who, for some reason, was bouncing around more than walking. As they passed by me without a glance, I heard the half-orc growl,
I'm telling you, bro, one more of these fetch quests and I'm ripping off my ears. It's so bloody boring.
The gnome groaned in response.
Tell me about it. But 2 or 3 more, and we're out of this shithole.
So, yeah, Reborn, pretty easy to spot. Present company, sometimes excluded. When I arrived at the smithy, I rapped politely on the door. A few moments later, the door was answered by a lumbering, soot-covered brute, who, eyes narrowed to slits, made a sound deep in his throat like a couple of boulders crashing together, and walked back into the smithy.
So, you're the one's been talking Lyle into stupid shit. Kid's in the back,
He grunted.
If he's hurt, I'll be blaming you with my hammer.
Your reputation with Lawrence Brennathan has decreased by -2,000. New reputation, -1,075. Disliked. You have been offered a quest. Good luck, Sonny. Convince Lawrence Brennathan that allowing his son Lyle to embark on adventures in your company was the right decision. Reward, unknown. Penalty for Lyle's death, -3,000 reputation with Lawrence Brennathan. Accept or decline. That felt pretty brutal to me, but then again, I'd just convinced his son to risk his life on a regular basis. I probably couldn't have expected a better reception. I had no clue how I was supposed to convince him that Lyle becoming my companion was an excellent idea, but decided to shrug and get on with it. Keeping him alive for the first day would have to do for starters. Near the back of the smithy, I found my wayward companion seated on a cot with his head leaned back towards the wall of the building, snoring like a buzzsaw. In his arms he held what I assumed was the reason for his oversleeping, and it was beautiful. It was a huge iron shield, which was probably about 1.2 meters in height, and looked to weigh enough that I'd have problems carrying it, let alone moving it quickly to defend myself. The rectangular curved shape reminded me of old movies portraying Roman soldiers, only he'd added some iron studs all along the edge of the shield, along with a protruding metal circle in the center, probably due to some craftsman's reasoning that was beyond me. I gently rapped on the shield and watched as he slowly came to, fascinated by the look of shock on his face when he realized who was standing before him. He started stuttering his way through an apology, but I interrupted him immediately, trying to dispel his nervousness. Relax, Lyle. I can see why you overslept if you worked all night finishing that shield. Can I see it? With his attention focused back onto familiar terrain, he calmed visibly. He turned the shield over in his hands and brushed it over before handing it to me. Actually, it's called a scutum. No clue why, really, but I've been meaning to make it since forever. I just, never had a reason before, you know. At this, he blushed, looked like he really couldn't wait to get out of town. The shield really did weigh a ton. I took a gander. Heavy iron scutum. This heavy iron shield is constructed with one thing in mind, protecting as much of the wearer as possible, yet still be light enough to carry in one hand. It has been outfitted with a shield boss for offensive purposes. +6 armor class. Workmanship, average. Durability, 90 out of 90. Impressive. The shield had as much durability as most of my clothes combined, and was probably even harder to dent. Looks like it can take quite a punch, I said, nodding in appreciation. What's that metal, in the middle for? It's called a boss. A shield boss. It's supposed to be used for punching or bashing, but I'm not entirely sure how it works in practice. Guess I'll just have to try it out. At this, I did grin. He'd admitted the day before that he didn't actually have any combat experience whatsoever, that he'd only trained in the backyard with an old cast-off mace and whatever armor pieces he'd been able to gather together over the years. I look forward to seeing the effect. Now, if you're about ready to go, I have a score to settle with a pack of links. He jumped up. No, wait, that's not all I've been spending time on yesterday. I've been around town asking whether anybody else needed some help outside the town, and I actually found some people who needed a hand with some gathering and some mining, but I didn't know what profession you had, so I just said we'd try to help them all." He took a short breath and rambled on. "Also, there's this girl outside town who needs us to gather a handful of eggs from a razor-tailed viper and kill some vipers, and I've heard that they're supposed to be pretty tough, but, I don't know." Listening to his enthusiastic rambling, I couldn't help but smile. He continued for a bit, just listing all the details until he saw my expression and his face fell. I held my hands up in a placating gesture. "Relax, Lyle. You did good. I'm just pleasantly surprised by how much effort you've already put into this. If you keep it up like this, we'll be sure to achieve some impressive results. Now, unfortunately, my profession is as a chronicler, and therefore I don't have the knowledge for gathering or mining anything. But whatever you yourself are able to help with, I'll be glad to assist with. And if you could share the details of whatever else we might be able to assist with in the village, we'll take a good whack at it, all right?" In the end, he was able to share 2 quests with me, and additionally, he had received a quest himself for mining some darkened iron, from his father, apparently. "You have been offered a quest. Why is it always—" "Navis Fenmorel has observed that a number of razor-tailed vipers have been spreading near the Moonsong Cave. Slay 10 vipers. Optional extra, bring back a clutch of viper eggs. Reward, 300 experience points, 5 silver, unknown item. Accept or decline." You have been offered a quest. How's the moonshine, sunshine? Kif Hardinger has had some unpleasant experiences with forest animals lately. He has asked you to check on his still in the forest and bring any full bottles back with you. Reward, 300 experience points. Payment in silver, depending on how many bottles you bring. Accept or decline. I accepted both quests and waited for Lyle to don the rest of his armor. A threadbare chainmail vest and a mismatched set of leather and chain armor for his arms and legs, and shoulder his dented old one-handed mace and backpack, and then we left for the woods. During our short walk towards the place where I'd been thoroughly humiliated last time, we discussed just how we ought to deal with the lynx, as well as what our contingency plans were. Our modus operandi should be pretty straightforward, if everything went according to plan, that is. Lyle was to catch and keep the attention of all the lynx, and I should then proceed to draw them away from him and finish them off one by one. I hoped that his armor, while of varying quality, should be enough to keep him from excessive damage. Our contingency plan was, for now, severely limited, due to our lack of money and useful items. There were tons of possible combinations of potions, magic, and mundane items, skills or spells that'd be useful in a tense situation, but that was something to investigate in the future. For now, if any of us judged the situation to be going badly enough that we stood no chance of winning, he'd shout, "Fly, you fool!" Yes, I insisted, and I'd quickly cast minor haste on both of us while we ran our respective butts off. I did also spend a couple of minutes stressing the importance of his getting away first and foremost. Worst case scenario, I could always be reborn once again. Not sure he really listened, though. He seemed to take the night role pretty seriously. Getting closer to the area where I had spotted the first lynx the day before, I turned towards Lyle and stopped him. We were currently standing in a relatively clear area. From here, it was just a 2-minute walk through an area which was partially covered in thickets before we'd reach the clearing. So, here's the deal, Lyle. If we're going to be questing together regularly, we need to be clever about it, or we'll end up as skulls decorating the shelves in the lair of the first cunning little monster to lay a third-rate ambush. This is one of the reasons why I chose you over Bertold, because he seems extremely headstrong, while you seem like the kind of person who's willing to think things over, do the necessary grunt work first, and keep vigilant all the time. I was entirely aware that I was laying it on pretty thick at this time, but I wanted to get my point across. And also might be having just a tad of an ulterior motive. I mean, if he went out and got us 2 new quests and himself a new item suited without any nudging whatsoever, what could he achieve for me, us, if I encouraged him a bit? I cleared my thoughts and continued with a deadpan expression, as if I were an experienced hunter, and not someone who'd been surprised, ambushed, bested, and led around by his nose for the better part of the past couple of days. The first and probably most important rule for avoiding surprises is to take your time. No rushing in without thinking, and no making up plans in the middle of a situation. The second is to do your homework. Know your enemy, know the terrain, and know the geography. The third is to always keep your eyes open. Now, tell me what you see, Lyle. He squinted at his surroundings with a perplexed expression on his face. The forest? Fir trees, boulders, grass, and dirt? I'm sorry, but I'm not really sure what you're looking for. I don't know that much about plants. That's my point exactly. You need to keep your eyes open all the time. So far, you don't know much about the world and which hostile creatures lurk out here, and therefore you don't know exactly what to look for. Yet. To tell you the truth, neither do I. I do know, however, that the savage felines we're looking for are damn good at camouflage and at climbing, so let's take it slow and really look out for the bastards. He nodded and started staring in the direction we were going. A short while later, I received a pop-up which gave me a hint that he had spotted the first enemy. Admittedly, the "oh" that escaped his lips was a bit of a giveaway. Teacher has increased to level 2. 16% progress to next level. Very good, I praised him. Let's take a while and see if we can spot any other enemies before we draw him out. I can tell you from experience that they hunt in packs. A short while later, my own spot skill had experienced an increase, and we'd spotted a total of 4 lynx in the nearest area, all with blue icons showing them to be slightly below my level. I took a deep breath, said, "Here goes, Lyle. You know what we agreed on." And we moved closer for the attack. Apparently, the awareness of the lynx was better than the range on my spells, because the moment I estimated that I'd entered attack range, the first lynx had already spotted us and let out a growl that was ranged somewhere between lion and housecat. Not really impressive, but I still felt a shiver running down my spine, certain that it would attract the attention of his packmates quickly. I immediately raised the violin and cast a sonic missile that lanced straight into his chest, and simultaneously, I moved as rapidly away from the carnivore as possible without stumbling. Watching the lynx sprinting towards me, long claws creating small furrows in the soft earth, I misjudged his approach and missed with my next sonic missile. I barely had time to unleash a sonic wave straight towards his path, and the next thing that registered was a heavy glancing blow to my abdomen, removing about 1/4 of my health. Panicking, I scrambled to get up and away until I noticed the unmoving body at my feet. Apparently, I had managed to kill him mid-jump, suffering the damage inflicted by his corpse. Disheveled and covered with dirt, I surveyed the situation and spotted a thing of beauty. Lyle, Scootum held low and mace in hand, holding off a total of 4 lynx, as if he'd been born for the job. Fighting defensively, he undoubtedly did a minimum of damage, but he also left a minimum of openings for the lightning-quick lynx, and up until now, his armor had done an incredible job of deflecting their claws and teeth. Eyeing an opening, I cast another sonic missile at a lynx who'd just been dealt a parrying blow from his mace, and set my feet in readiness for the next charge. This time, I didn't wait to watch the feline leap before I spread the damaging rays of sonic wave before me, and instantly dodged to the right. My timing was anything but perfect, and I suffered an additional glancing blow to my legs, for less damage this time, but I did get the chance to enjoy the sight of the lynx's lifeless body tumbling along the ground for several meters, before I swerved back towards the battle to be greeted by a confusing set of happenings. First, a pitiful yowl blasted through the forest, followed by a lynx cartwheeling through the air in an arc leading away from Lyle. Second, a lynx was able to dodge its way behind Lyle and sink its fangs deeply into his lower leg, where it clung ferociously to him, attached by both its fangs and claws. Third, Lyle looked to be building up an impressive panic, flailing furiously at the cat with both arms and legs while blood was pouring down his leg and, strangely, his nose. While Lyle looked entirely out of control, he didn't seem to be in any mortal danger, due to the damage he'd sustained so far. Also, I could tell that he'd chosen that moment to activate his star sign, because his body had just bulked out massively, like he'd spent half a year at the gym skipping everything but chest day. Even though the extra bulk and hit points were temporary, they'd grant him a bit of momentary safety, which is why I chose to do something about the last lynx attacking him instead. A well-aimed sonic missile to its hind quarters definitely got its attention, and it turned upon me with a hiss. Just then, I noticed that the airbound lynx had actually landed far enough from Lyle that it had chosen me for the closer, or less problematic target. This left me with one cat charging swiftly at me from straight ahead, maybe 20 meters away, and another one 15 meters away and to the side, stalking quickly towards my left flank. For a moment, I could smell a redo of the other day's humiliation, but I moved along with the left lynx, and within seconds, I had both cats getting uncomfortably close, but comfortably within the cone of my spell. "Not today, Garfield," I mumbled through clenched teeth, and cast Sonic Wave once again. When the noise had dissipated, I could see both lynx lying unmoving nearly at my feet, and Lyle standing panting, bloody, but very much alive, over the unrecognizable remains of the final lynx. We'd done it. Our first battle was over, and we had triumphed. "That was bloody awesome!" I shouted to the world in general. "Lyle, you beautiful bastard! What you just did—" I gestured wildly with my arms, trying to replicate his earlier movements. "Holding off against 4 of the damn cats like it was no effort at all? That was friggin' astounding!" Lyle's nascent smile kept growing larger until he as well was grinning like a loon. Sporting a leg that was still bleeding along with a nose that looked twice its normal size, I had to ask, "Lyle, your nose. What the hell happened there?" Lyle blushed like a teenager whose parents had just discovered his secret bookmarks on the internet. "Well," he mumbled, voice distorted by his swollen nose. "When the lynx got my leg from behind, I just lost it, I guess. I was hitting left and right, and it just hung on, biting and scratching. Hurt like hell, I can tell you. And then this other cat leapt at me, and I kicked straight at it, hard and fast as I could. Thing is, I'd forgotten that I was still carrying the shield, so I kicked the shield." He indicated his steel-capped hard leather boots. "And it seems the shield got enough momentum to send the cat flying and to continue straight upwards into my nose." I have achieved a number of personal successes in my life. To this day, I still count the fact that I didn't dissolve into hysterical laughter at his explanation one of my more impressive mental achievements, even with the mental picture of him flattening his own nose interrupting my thoughts constantly. I did have room for a quick epiphany, however, and inspected Lyle, bringing up his character sheet. Ka-ching! There it was. His clumsiness had actually gained him a new skill. Shield kick. You kick at the shield, causing the lower edge to swing forward with damaging effect. May reduce durability of shield or footwear, or cause damage to yourself. Causes strength damage. Chance to interrupt, stun, or knock back enemy. Cooldown 6 seconds. Cost 20 stamina. You know, Lyle, what you just did might actually work in another combat situation, mostly since nobody will be expecting it. Just, remember to duck next time. At that point, we felt that we deserved a short break and treated ourselves to some food, allowing our life in mana bars to slowly replenish. A short while later, we were both completely restored, except for Lyle's poor snout, which would need some careful attention from a healer before he'd be able to smell anything again, or, speaking in game terms, he'd received a 72-hour minor debuff. We collected the tails for the quest, along with a few other drops from the links. Deciding not to waste any more time, we marched straight off on the lookout for the remaining 3 animals we needed for the quest. In the end, we ended up killing 9 of them. First, we were lucky enough to spot a group of 2 lynx that posed us no problem whatsoever, as we spotted them dozing in the higher branches of a tree. We even managed to pull off an extremely effective combo. I offered a rude awakening to one of the lynx by blowing it out of the tree with a sonic missile, and Lyle added insult to injury by shield bashing it mid-air, leaving it stunned and bewildered at death's door. The members of the last group were somewhat tougher, as one of the lynx, supposedly the pack leader, was a bit larger, meaner, and tougher than the rest. But I managed to bring the small one down quickly while Lyle kept the attention of the larger one. After that, between the 2 of us, the pack leader went down fairly quickly. We spent some quality time relaxing after that, and I used the time to check out all pop-ups and Lyle's character sheet, seeing if we'd gained something useful except for experience points. Item-wise, it wasn't particularly impressive. Apart from the quest items, we'd only located 8 sets of lynx claws, 1 set of large lynx claws, and a set of serrated lynx fangs. Concerning the skills, the results were pretty nice. I'd received a number of different skill levels. Sonic Missile, Sonic Wave, Sonic Spells, Concentration, and Unarmored Dodge had all increased, both offensive spells by 2, and I'd gained a new skill, Leadership. I guess that all the jumping around mid-cast could easily have caused my spell to backfire. If possible, I'd better get my concentration up to acceptable levels as fast as possible. Oh, and luckily for me, it seemed that even a half-arsed attempt at dodging allowed my unarmored skill to increase slightly. Lyle had gained skills in heavy armor and blunt weapons and gained the sub-skills one-handed plus shield and shield bash. And my new favorite, shield kick. He'd also gained another level in spot. The new skill, shield bash, was basically the same as it is in pretty much every game ever. Smash shield into enemy's face. Laugh at his stunned look. Kill him. So, all in all, the skill was similar to shield kick without any of the negative effects. Nobody in their right mind would ever choose to use shield kick instead, except that it might surprise the hell out of anybody who was expecting any of the good old tricks. Apart from that, the only pop-ups were from collecting the quest items and the regular experience point pop-ups. I saw 8 instances of, you have defeated a young feral lynx in battle. You gain 30 experience points. And 1 of, you have defeated a mature feral lynx in battle. You gain 40 experience points. This granted a total of 280 experience points, far from enough to level either me or Lyle. I felt a bit disappointed. The loot was underwhelming, and the experience wasn't all that, but maybe that new skill would save the day. I checked out the skill pop-up. Congratulations, you have learned a new skill, Leadership. You have assumed the responsibility of leading a group. Every skill point in Leadership increases the range of group bonuses, reception of experience, and updates from kills, and the range at which you see your group members on the minimap. In addition, for every 2 levels in Leadership, you gain 1 Leadership point to spend. Stat: Charisma. I'd played a total of 3 weeks' time in the beta, and I'd never heard or seen anything about Leadership. Maybe it was a more recent invention from Exogenics. It really shouldn't have surprised me, though, as group mechanics aren't that special an addition to MMOs. Anyway, I immediately brought up my character sheet and spotted the new addition. Leadership points, 1. And right next to it, a glowing blue button stating Allocate. Smiling in anticipation, kind of them to award a point at level 1, I clicked the button, and instantly my view was transformed to an entirely new Leadership status screen. I was rewarded with a top-down view of a huge shape, covered in a giant mass of moving, floating fog which enshrouded everything, except a tiny part in the middle of my view. Most of the screen was grayed out, but I could make out the general shape, which was that of a 4-leaf clover, sans stalk. The only part of the leaves that wasn't covered by fog of war was the absolute center, and zooming in, I could tell that each leaf had its separate description: melee, ranged, magic, and utility. Focusing on melee, I then had the option to follow a glowing path along either edge of the leaf. The upper part was called offense and the lower defense. This part of it was the same for all leaves except utility, which was divided into in combat and out of combat. I quickly clicked around all the paths to get an overview over what was available to me and whether I was already able to afford anything, having just barely scratched the surface of group combat in World of Chains. Luckily, all the paths weren't open right off the bat. This left me with the below overview. Leadership options. Available points, 1. Melee attack, 1. Melee attack damage is increased by 10%. Resilience, 1. Melee damage taken is reduced by 10%. Ranged damage, 1. Ranged damage attack is increased by 10%. Ranged avoidance, 1. Ranged damage taken is reduced by 10%. Spell damage, 1. Plus 10% spell damage. Magic resistance, 1. Magic damage taken is reduced by 10%. Improved regeneration, 1. Stamina, mana, and health regeneration speed in combat is increased by 20%. Improved metabolism, 1. The effects of food and drink on group members is increased by 20%. Well, the first choice was pretty easy. I was still very much focused on the whole try not to get Lyle killed issue, so I happily invested my first leadership point on Resilience 1. This opened up for the next update on the melee defense path, which was Resist Effects 1. Chance to resist physical status effects like stun, trip, knockdown, and similar increased by 10, still at the low cost of 1 point. It was good to know that the costs didn't increase, at least not initially. Also at this point in the path, the Fog of War revealed that the leaf offered a side shoot. Apparently, there were also optional skills available for choosing along the path. I was fresh out of points at the moment, however, and ready to get on with some of the quests. Lyle and I had a chat on the topic of local geography. To be more specific, which of our current quests was the closest at the moment, and it turns out that he was just about as ignorant as I was on the topic. Luckily, with a little backtracking involved, he knew how to get to the Bronze Bells mine, where he should be able to mine the darkened iron he needed for his quest. And afterwards, there was still the Warlock's Tower to explore for my Chronicler quest, right next to the village. We made good time to the mine, which was situated a few kilometers south along the western side of the jagged rush without any incidents. The brisk walk also gave me a chance to get to know Lyle better, like regular person speak, not just, which skills do you have that I can use for my own safety? From what he told me, I gathered that he had lived a pretty sheltered life within Grant's Crossing. There was no doubt that his old man loved him, but in Lyle's eyes he also kept him sheltered and smothered him. What a typical mean parent, keeping his only child from embarking upon perilous quests in his aspiration to become one of those knights Lyle had read so much about. In that aspect, Lyle was pretty much the archetype of all teenagers everywhere. But disregarding that part, he was also an eminently likable young man. He whistled when he walked, had a life-affirming positive outlook on everything, and actually, as opposed to every other young man ever, including myself, thought things through before making his decisions. I also told him a bit about myself, in very general terms, of course, and the kilometers flew by. Chapter 15. Rats. A short while later, we were standing at the brink of the jagged rush, which, even on days of fair weather such as we were having today, lived up to its name. The wide river was dominated by white-tipped waves crashing noisily among the toothed fangs of numerous rocks lurking, waiting for anybody foolish enough to brave the passage. Our current focus, however, failed to impress. The mine consisted of what looked to be a natural cave entrance with an old wooden sign above the entrance stating, Bronze Bells Mine, in worn letters. I turned towards Lyle and asked, Really? That's a mine? There's not even any, what do you call them, those tracks for the little wagon where you bring up all the ore? Lyle grinned from ear to ear. I think you're talking about a mine railway and mine carts. That's a different level from this mine, Arcangelo. As far as I know, you will be the 5th or 6th person to enter the mine ever. My dad named the mine himself. He was walking along with Chertog. This was about 18 years ago, give or take, trying to find some ore source for Grant's Crossing. Chertog saw the opening and came up with some long technical explanation and said that there was likely to be plenty of ore for the entire town inside. At the very least, lots of ore for bronze and brass. Dad looked at Chertog in the entrance and said, "You're just scared of going deeper into the woods. Little cave hasn't got enough ore to make you a set of new balls." Chertog just looked at him and said, "Care to make a bet?" Of course, even though my dad lost the bet and Chertog got to name the mine, Mom later forced him to change part of the name to Bells. Anyway, since that first day, it's always just been Dad and one other person entering the mine, one of us to mine, the other to keep the rats away. I nodded while he talked. That's a great story. Wait, rats? Yep, disgusting large rats who tend to believe that the mine is theirs. Can't mine down there without attracting one or two of them. I hope you'll have my back while I'm mining. Of course, there was no way I could say no to that, even though I hate rats. Bloody hate them. Those lifeless, hateful eyes and the skittering sound they made when they moved across the floor, which was just quiet enough that you could spend hours at night doubting whether you'd imagined the sound or not. Yeah, sure, I have issues. But then, who doesn't? I let Lyle enter first and took a bit of relief from his relaxed attitude. If someone like him, who hadn't had a lot of experience with battle, wasn't afraid to confront the little monsters, they couldn't be that dangerous now, could they? Right inside the entrance, a large wooden bucket hung suspended from a hook, and Lyle helped himself to a few things, a pickaxe and a small oil lamp. I felt an immense gratitude for the oil lamp as the world turned dark pretty quickly, and not just, you might stub your toe on your way to the bathroom dark, but I can't remember when I last saw my hands dark. Sure, I still had a couple of torches in my backpack, but they were short-lived things and only meant for an emergency. Trying to wrap myself in this last feeling of relief, we went onwards into the darkness. I stayed as close on Lyle's heels as I could without stumbling into him. But as we descended and nothing untoward came charging out from the darkness, I started to relax a bit and take an interest in my surroundings. The cave itself was pretty uninteresting, and as far as I could tell, seemed to be a natural cave without anything man-made. This, of course, meant that the flooring was rough and uneven, and we had to climb over and around several obstacles to continue. After 10 minutes, Lyle slowed his pace, let out a satisfied sigh, and said, "Oh, we're here. Man, I love this place." The soft glow of the oil lamp illuminated the widening passage, and what had moments before been a cramped corridor likely to induce claustrophobic tendencies was replaced by what I would call a miracle of nature. An underground cathedral, glorious enough to turn a man to religion. The cavernous vaults were held up by numerous huge pillars, stalactites and stalagmites in huge numbers, and what had moments ago been covered in darkness came alive in a dazzling kaleidoscope wave of light as our poor light source was reflected off countless still water pools and brilliant geodes in the walls. The ceiling was high enough that the light couldn't reach, but the walls to either side were over 50 meters away. The far wall was not to be seen. I spun around myself a few times, trying to take it all in. "Lyle, this is incredible. I'm speechless. Thank you for bringing me here." He walked over to the nearest wall right next to the cave tunnel, mumbled something, and touched a specific spot on the wall before nodding to himself. He then turned his head towards me and said, "If I were you, I'd probably spend a little less time thanking me and a bit more preparing myself, because once I start swinging, the sound is going to attract all nearby rats." He then gave me a wicked grin and swung with all his might at the wall. Cursing Lyle, his ancestors, and all knights in general, weren't they supposed to be the good guys? I quickly equipped my violin and planted myself firmly right before the tunnel where I could keep an eye on all sides, and would be able to ditch that malevolent bastard Lyle if things got too heated. Moments later, the skittering started and the memories came pouring back. Ugh. I decided to save that particular flashback for some unspecified time some 20 to 30 years into the future, and instead focused on keeping my eyes peeled and frying the first rat to show its whiskered face. The lighting sure wasn't helping at all. The sparkling, shimmering light caused the entire room to look somehow unreal, and shadows kept forming in random places. Along with the ringing of Lyle's pickaxe, the atmosphere of the place had quickly gone from otherworldly dream to fevered nightmare. Suddenly, one rat and then another scurried forth from separate sides of a meter-wide stalagmite, about 15 meters away. In my panicked state, I jinxed my release of the first sonic missile, and it flew wide of the leftmost rat by almost half a meter. The rats converged on my location, and I instantly released a sonic wave aimed at the space between the two, threw myself to the left in order to, hopefully, avoid their charge, and be on my feet when the cooldown for sonic missile had passed. I landed awkwardly, and my roll carried me just 2 meters away. The subsequent scramble gained me a couple of minor bruises, but I managed to stumble quickly to my feet in order to observe something wonderful. A couple of feet before me lay the twisted corpses of both rats. I quickly checked my status log, and it hadn't even been a critical hit. Nevertheless, it had been enough to finish them off. I listened intently for a moment, but could hear no further sounds from any rats. "Fragile little vermin, right?" Lyle's voice was strained from keeping back his laughter at my nerves. "You really should have seen your face right when they attacked. Oh, sorry, but I've never had the chance to pull a prank like this before. You're not mad, right? I mean, they are attracted by the sound, but the noise from the digging only travels so far, so we never attract more than 2 or 3. It's not like we were in any danger, Arcangelo." From one moment to the next, Lyle's expression had changed to apprehensive. He probably remembered that I was supposed to be his ticket to becoming a real knight. Pushing my frayed nerves to the back of my mind, I responded, "No, I'm not angry. You really got the better of me." I couldn't bear to berate him, even though I really wanted to take out my frustration on somebody. It'd be like kicking a particularly hopeful little puppy. "Now, did you get what you needed from the first spot here?" "Yeah, I got 3 pieces of ore from this first vein. Would you mind if we spent a little extra time down here so I can maybe extract some extra ore? I can probably use it to make some other equipment for myself, and for you, if you have some good ideas. And a schematic, I guess. I don't know much about caster stuff." He shrugged. "Sure, no problem. Just warn me next time so I have time to get in position. Let's get moving then." I waved him forward. Before I followed him, I spent a moment observing the dead rats. Now that they were lying still, I could see that they really were a couple of sorry specimens. Scrawny things with a patchy fur and maybe 40 centimeters long, with tails of a similar length. Nevertheless, their teeth were pretty impressive, and I could only imagine the debuffs one could get from being bitten. I shuddered and quickly trailed after Lyle. Half an hour later, my fear of rats was forgotten, and I'd started having fun. The unpleasant task had turned into a regular turkey shoot, and by now I was experimenting with just how well I could move and cast at the same time. I had not been bitten once, and Lyle had gathered 8 pieces of the required darkened iron, as well as 12 pieces of regular iron ore. Nonchalantly, I finished off the last rat of the current attack with a sonic missile cast while ducking as low as I could, and watched the rat crumble to the ground. At this point, we'd moved a couple of 100 meters into the cavern, and in the distance, I could glimpse the far wall. We seemed to be approaching the end of the room. When we moved on a moment later in silent agreement, I asked, "How come you've never cleared all the rats out of here when they're so weak?" He shrugged and answered, Chertog said that there are larger rats if you descend further, and that it's a really... Look out! At his cry, I spun around in the direction he was staring and could see 2 rats just closing in on me from just a few meters away. Reacting by instinct, I rapidly cast Sonic Wave in their direction, and I smiled, watching the Sonic Wave destroy the 2 critters, only for the smile to freeze on my lips as the wave continued, traveling into a huge, needle-thin stalactite which instantly broke off and fell to the ground in a resounding, clangorous, shattering mess, completely destroying a number of smaller stalagmites in the process. I looked at Lyle, who was visibly blanching. So, if a little noise attracts a few rats, then this would mean... He swallowed. That we run for the tunnel, I guess. Good call, I said, and took off. The following day, I was able to appreciate what a good choice it had been to throw a few extra points in endurance. Otherwise, I never would have made it all the way to the tunnel. In the middle of the sprint, I was not able to muster any coherent thought. The earlier skittering sound had grown in intensity and seemed to fill up the entire cavern around us, and was also accompanied by high-pitched squeaks, which somehow seemed to contain a hatred of all things bipedal. When we made it to the exit tunnel, I was trailing behind Lyle by a couple of meters and tiring rapidly. I chanced a glance behind me and almost tripped, as I couldn't even process the numbers that I was seeing. It seemed like there were rats everywhere, with the closest no further away than 20 meters or so. I yelled to Lyle, We won't make it to the exit! When I yell now, we stand our ground! He grunted in assent, and we ran onwards into the tunnel until we had reached the point where Lyle was almost in danger of grazing his wide shoulders on each side of the tunnel. I then shouted, Now! Let me past, Lyle! Then I turned around and cast Sonic Wave straight back into the tunnel before I scraped my way past Lyle, who was standing ready, shield in hand and breathing rapidly. It seemed that my spell had gained us a couple of precious seconds, because I managed to turn around and get a good look at what was rushing at us. At first, it looked like a veritable wall of fur, teeth, and glowing red eyes, but looking closer, I could spot maybe 10 or 12 rats inside the corridor with more approaching. I managed to assess the threat level of a handful of the rats. Luckily, most of them were the low-level, weak, large rats I'd been exterminating earlier with a light green name tag, but a few had yellow tags, showing that they were large rats with the same level as me. I felt like I'd kept my fear of rats pretty well at bay until now, but all at once it came rushing back to me. I simply couldn't process how we were supposed to make it. For lack of a better plan, any plan really, I sent a sonic missile into the snout of one of the higher-level rats, which of course did nothing to impede its progress. With both my spells on cooldown, I could only watch and pray that Lyle rose to the occasion. And in the name of Jesus, Beelzebub, and Mozart, did he ever rise to the occasion. The first rats converged on him where he stood, left foot planted on the ground with his iron scutum placed just above the ground. He responded by letting out a furious shout and kicking his shield straight into the teeth of 2 leading rats, ducking to avoid the backlash. His timing was perfect, and the rodents tumbled end over end into their rushing brethren, resulting in a chaotic tangle of movement, limbs, and blood among the first rats. Lyle then took advantage of their disorientation and dispatched one of the level 2 rats with a furious overhead blow with his mace, and instantly he went back to his defensive position. Mouth agape, I was shamed back into action by his martial prowess just when the cooldown on my sonic wave had passed. I shouted, Perfect! We do that again and alternate our attacks. We'll make it, Lyle! To show him what the plan was, I moved forward, cast Sonic Wave at the trio of rats who had evaded the tangle of moving and dead rats, followed up with a Sonic Missile to finish off the lone rat who survived the initial spell, and moved back behind Lyle. Switch! I yelled, filled to the brim with adrenaline, and cheered Lyle on when he placed himself in front of me again. The combo worked flawlessly. We switched places twice, and the rats were entirely unable to force their way past us. A single rat had managed to evade a shield kick and bury his teeth into Lyle's ankle before he smashed it to bits, but the wound didn't seem to bother him much. My hopes were beginning to rise, as I could see the number of remaining rats dwindling to a handful, while no more rodents seemed to be emerging from the cavern room. At that instant, a glowing set of eyes appeared in the tunnel, set at twice the height of the other rats. A hideous screech filled the corridor. I immediately looked at the tag of the newcomer and felt my hopes being dashed yet again when I saw an orange tag stating Dire Rat, and the monstrous creature moved into the tunnel. Comparing the Dire Rat to the other rats would be like comparing a platypus to a warthog. Sure, they're both ugly as sin, but one of them is quite a bit more likely to trample you and defecate on your corpse. While it was basically the same shape as the other rats, all similarities ended there. It was more than 2 meters long, not counting the tail, and looked to weigh about the same as your average brown bear. Its front teeth were enormous, probably the length of my hands, and all 4 paws sported dagger-like claws ready to rend and tear. My mind was about to turn numb with fear, but luckily, the last minutes had shown me exactly what worked on these rats. I instantly cast a sonic missile right in its ugly snout and readied myself to meet its charge with another sonic wave. Lyle, meanwhile, had finished off the 2 remaining rats right in front of him when I stepped in front of him and started casting, intending to shave off as much health as possible. The Dire Rat came charging in, barely able to fit in the narrow passage, and mid-stride, it completely smashed my battle plan, as it screeched again, and the pervasive, high-pitched voice was accompanied by a visible sound wave not dissimilar from my own sonic wave. Only it was dark-veined in aspect and slightly narrower. Whatever it was, it caught me off guard, caused a little damage, and disrupted my cast. I only had the time to yell, "Holy crap!" when the Dire Rat charged straight into me like a wayward freight train, hitting me with its lowered head and tossing me several meters through the air, along with a complimentary mid-air impact with both one wall and something a bit softer, presumably either a rat corpse or some part of Lyle's. The pain was trying to catch my full attention, and I had to concentrate really hard to be able to try to get my bearings and rise, however shakily, to my legs. I could see that I was missing over half of my health already, with the battle being initiated just seconds ago. My sonic missile from earlier had only removed a tiny part from the Dire Rat's health bar. At least, due to the mana well ability of my violin, I still had my entire mana reserves full, even though the mana well was just about emptied out. Maybe the best option would be to... The rat landed a heavy blow on Lyle's scutum shield and created a deep dent in the shield, and Lyle's leg, which had been injured earlier, looked about to buckle on him, but he caught his balance at the last moment. Okay, yeah, toughing it out and taking the occasional pot shot at the rat from behind Lyle's back was not an option. All right, time to get radical, I thought, and brought up my inventory, exchanging my violin for the small hand spear and downing the minor potion of spider grip. I started sprinting towards Lyle, and at the last moment yelled, "Lyle, take a knee, now!" He reacted quickly and kneeled, keeping his shield between him and the rat. At top speed, I used Lyle's shoulder as a springboard, launching myself as high in the air as possible in order to land on the other side of the rat. In my mind's eye, I had held a vision of myself taking a dive, coming up rolling in order to quickly launch a surprise attack at the Dire Rat's exposed back. To my detriment, I forgot to factor in my horrible strength and agility, and I landed, arms flailing wildly, on the left side of the rat's hind quarters. The rat seemed quite confused by my stunt, and for a split second failed to act at all, which allowed me to haul myself hand over hand up on the Dire Rat's wide back. Normally, my stats would never have allowed for similar accomplishments, but the potion made the greasy fur of the rat seem like well-made handholds. A quick glance at Lyle told me that he was in trouble as well, down by 40% health and bleeding from a nasty scratch in the side. I could tell that he wouldn't be able to keep up the fight for long. I grabbed a fistful of fur with one hand, raised the spear, and felt a sharp lance of pain enter my lower leg as one of the two remaining smaller rats had climbed onto the larger rat's back and attacked me while the last one was circling back and forth just behind it, waiting its turn.
"Enough already, you overgrown pests!"
I shouted, and let loose a sonic wave aimed behind me. I managed somehow to keep my concentration with all the distractions, even though the spell had felt a lot more slippery than usual. The pain receded, and I felt forced to hope that I'd finished them off with the last salvo and take action against the large beast, as I could see Lyle's health dropping below 40%. Raising my spear, I drove it down once again toward the rat and felt it penetrate the thick skin of the creature, only it was far from enough to cause it any real damage. Coupled with the sonic missile that I forced into existence straight into the rat's body simultaneously, it was enough to catch the attention of the giant animal. What followed was the weirdest type of rodeo I've ever heard about. The rat did everything it could to force me off its back, and I was forced to forget about everything else and to just hold on for dear life. My perspective of what was happening was limited, as I clung to the dire rat, body splayed as widely as possible to avoid falling off. My guess was that Lyle was taking full advantage of the animal's sudden distraction, because I could suddenly hear a few solid thwacks, followed by the rat's squeals. After a loud ringing sound, my world was wrenched sideways as the rat's head was slammed into the wall, and the rat tottered drunkenly to the ground. I could see that the latest attack had taken a decent toll on its health, and I took the opportunity to add insult to injury while the rat was unmoving, tearing out the spear and bringing it down on the same spot as earlier. This time, the spear went in deeper, and instantly I could feel the rat twisting to get back on its feet. Normally, I wouldn't attribute much intelligence to rats, but this one seemed to have its fair share, because seeing how it couldn't dislodge me, it changed tactics, and the moment it got its feet under it, it threw itself sideways at the tunnel wall, aiming to leave a barred-shaped pancake permanently attached to the wall. There was no possible way for me to move quickly enough to avoid the wall, and I could only hang on and pray for a quick end. As predicted, what followed was the pain of being stuck between the rock and a ratty place. Much to my joy, however, the attack didn't finish me off, and I managed to hold on to the animal, if just barely. If anything, the squirming and squealing of the dire rat had reached new heights. Looking down to my right hand, I could see the stroke of luck that had saved me, as the meeting between the wall and the spear butt had apparently hammered the spear further into its body, leaving only a hand length of spear shaft on the outside. The health of the animal had also taken a massive toll, and I could see how another mace hit from Lyle lowered its health to about 15%. At that instant, the pain seemed to drive the giant critter mad, and again I was reduced to doing nothing but hanging on to the spear. Halfway suspended into the air, I did have a front row seat to how the animal crashed shakily to its feet, ignored yet another full contact blow from Lyle, and apparently tried to climb over my poor companion. At this very inopportune moment, his leg decided to buckle, and everything seemed to move in slow motion, as I could feel my world first going upwards and then crashing forwards again, with both the rat and myself landing on top of Lyle and his shield. His body had fully disappeared under the rat, and the scutum was the only thing preserving his life, as he'd managed to bring it up to cover his head at the last moment. The frenzied sounds of the rat's deadly teeth digging into the scutum promised to bring an end to that protection, and I cast the last remaining splinter of self-preservation to the wind, climbing hand over hand up along the body of the rat, until I finally managed to reach its neck and throw myself hands first at its head. And yet again, I missed. My body was arcing over the critter's head, but stretching, I managed to grab onto the animal's eye ridge with one hand and, straining all the while, cast Sonic Missile. Straight into the eye. I didn't have a lot of time to process the result, as gravity, my old hateful enemy, propelled me head over heels over the rat and caused me to slam heavily to the floor, removing everything but the last splinter of my health. I could barely see straight as I once again forced myself back to get to my feet. And upon seeing the huge rat start moving again, I almost popped off another sonic wave before realizing that its eyes were glassy and lifeless, and that the movement actually originated from underneath the rat, where Lyle was struggling to escape its clutches. I hurried over, and with Lyle's help managed to drag the rat's head off of him, drag him out of there, and apply a set of bandages before the bleeding damage from his numerous wounds removed the remaining slivers of his health. Needless to say, we took a long break, quite a ways back down the corridor where the stench of the dead rats wasn't as overpowering. We were both extremely battered and had several debuffs. Lyle was hit the hardest in that respect, with 2 24-hour disease debuffs decreasing his strength, agility, and endurance, while I got away with a 2-hour disease debuff, reducing poison and disease resistances by 20%, and a 24-hour minor wasting disease debuff, which gave me a -2 to strength, -20% to my movement speed, and an incredibly queasy stomach. I wondered which lucky exogenics programmer got that job. So, hey, boyo, you need to create a realistic disease of someone who has a minor case of the runs. Enjoy. Disregarding my stomach's flip-flopping, we settled down to take a meal. Lyle's mother had actually made us sandwiches, which made me feel as if I was back in school again. But hey, sandwiches. Munching, I spent the downtime checking up on the rewards we'd received. The first part of our rat extermination, before everything went to hell, had resulted in 12 slain weak rats, and during the second frantic struggle for survival, we had finished off a whopping 16 weak rats, 3 large rats, and the dire rat. While the weak rats granted almost no experience, a measly 15 points each, the large ones gave 30 points each, and the dire rat a full 300, which resulted in a total of 630 experience and left both of us with the next level within staring distance. I'd gained another skill level in concentration, 1 in leadership, and 1 in sonic spells. Both offensive sub-skills had gained 2 levels each. My ill-advised stunts and earlier fun time with the lesser rats had also gained me a skill increase to unarmored dodge and an entirely new skill. Congratulations! You have learned a new skill. Acrobatics. Sometimes you engage in the performance of extraordinary feats of balance, agility, or motor coordination. Every skill point to acrobatics will increase the chance of succeeding in your attempts and making your feats even more impressive. Stat: Agility. Lyle, meanwhile, had gained nice increases in his one-handed and shield kick, and especially heavy armor skills. Apparently, taking a good beating did wonders for your armor skills. Who knew? Apart from anybody who'd ever played RPGs. The nicest part, however, was the 2 pop-ups that had appeared after the conclusion of the battle. Congratulations, you have gained a group achievement. Survive the Swarm 1. You have survived an attack by more than 10 times your group's number. In the future, your group receives +2 to all defensive skill checks when your group is heavily outnumbered. Congratulations, you have gained a group achievement. Defeat the Swarm 1. You have eliminated a group numbered more than 10 times your group's number. In the future, your group receives +2 to all offensive skill checks when your group is heavily outnumbered. Holy hell. I still couldn't fathom that I'd never engaged in group combat in World of Chains before when the possible gains were as impressive as this. Also, I loved what this promised, that any truly impressive group feats had the possibility to not only gain experience and loot, but also achievements with buffs for the future. Lyle and I agreed that with what we'd just been through, we weren't going to turn homewards without mining the last ore. But first, we had the obligatory loot search in front of us, which was made less enjoyable than usual due to the horrible smell of the rat corpses. Nonetheless, 10 minutes of searching among the corpses landed us with quite a large load. The weak rats dropped a rat tail each. I don't know what the developers had with tails, but it seemed to be the standard drop. Apart from that, The drops were a hodgepodge of different body parts of differing quality and obscurity. Rat claws, rat eyes, and even 2 sets of rat gizzards. Purely common drops with a couple of uncommon ones mixed in. I've always been of the waste not, want not religion, but I was pretty close to leaving the gizzards on the ground. At least once they were inside the inventory, the stench dissipated. The large rats dropped more of the same, but the dire rat was extremely giving. We received a set of large, sharp rat fangs, several large, sharp rat claws, a whole handful of tuft of dire rat hair, a fury gland, whatever that was, and of course, a dire rat tail. All of the items were of the uncommon quality except the fury gland, and, to my surprise, the tail, which were rares. After being thus loaded down by tons of animal parts, we moved back to the cavern and located the final ore vein. While Lyle was busy mining it, I kept my eyes and ears peeled. I definitely didn't feel up to a repeat performance. This is how I spotted something out of place in the cavern, something that looked to be man-made. When Lyle had finished, I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, yeah, it's a door. No clue where it goes, but apparently it says, 'Do not enter' in Dwarvish or something like that. There's a couple of other side tunnels where the rats come from, but this is the only part that has been closed." Unable to temper my curiosity, I dragged Lyle over to the door with me, which proved to be a rectangular metal door built sturdily enough to resist the charge of a moderately ill-tempered rhinoceros, with 2 heavy metal latches placed on our side of the door. So, apparently, the door was meant to keep something on the other side out. True to Lyle's words, the door held words etched into the metal surface that were probably Dwarvish. Anek mer drakmar, nerak da adtikal aftrum otok ath na komuros fried. I took the time to write down the words, wanting to learn what the fuss was about, and when I'd finished writing, I received a pop-up. You have been offered a quest. Here be ... Part 1. Chronicler Quest. You have discovered a door in an underground cave which seems to have been made to keep something or someone from exiting the cave. Figure out the story behind the door. Reward? Unknown. Accept or decline. Quite satisfied that my old RPG instincts had not failed me, I chose accept, and Lyle and I started for the exit. A short while later, we were enjoying the sun on our faces and walking towards Grant's Crossing again. We both felt pretty battered and ready to call it a day, so we agreed that we'd take a look near the tower. But if there was any sign of resistance, monsters, traps, or whatever, we'd haul ass for the safety of the village. In this moment of respite, I at last came to a conclusion to the question I'd asked myself days earlier. What am I supposed to do with this character? Well, the recent days and fights had taught me that I really wanted this character to work, and that with the right combinations and teamwork, it could work. Until proven otherwise, I'd discard all other options, try to create a master bard and carve my own enjoyment out of the world of chains. I still didn't know entirely about the money question, but decided to let it lie, for the next few days at least.